Oh, yeah, we got to overturn.
You're listening to the E-Men, inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Indeed you are. It's volume 33 of the mini-series. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was another mini-series, volume 43 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, with retired FDNY Deputy Chief Steve Kubler, who is the brother, of course, of Kevin Kubler, who I work for, and is 1/5 alongside myself of the Getting Salty experience. So it was good to talk to Chief Steve. 43 years in the job. So he had a lot of stories across multiple different decades and a lot of different stops. And tonight's guest has a lot of interesting stories to tell as well. And we're certainly going to get to them. Appreciate everybody tuning in tonight via LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And before we get into tonight's guest, we have a sponsor, of course, and that is Mr. Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Billy Ryan, also co-executive producer and creator of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's bomb squad. A couple shout-outs before I do the introduction. Aaron Cook, Darren Phillips, all watching all the way in Vancouver, Canada. Patty McGee tuning in via LinkedIn. He says absolutely one of the best. And John Lampkin, who a couple years ago was my very first ESU interview. Also says Mike Corr, one of the best. Both of those gentlemen tuning in via LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody, again, that's watching. All right, my next guest for 40 years specialized in service and protection, and for 20 of those years did it as a member of the New York City Police Department. His journey took him from the confines of Queens later on into the Emergency Service Unit, where he spent a dozen years of his career, 1986 until 1998, as well as the Joint Terrorism Task Force, of which he retired out of in 2002. He was also heavily involved in helping form the Urban Search and Rescue Task Force team that New York sends out to respond to natural disasters across the country and across the globe, and encompassing both members of the FDNY and, of course, the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, and that for this volume 33 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit is a man I watched on Cops many years ago and get to speak to tonight, and that's retired NYPD Detective Mike Corr. Mike, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. A long time coming, like I said. So you told me this when we met at Two Truck back last month, and that was your journey really into the NYPD and by extension ESU began with your uncles. Tell me about that.
Oh, this is an incredible story. It's almost unbelievable. Back when I was 7 years old, my grandparents invited me to take me to the Ice Capades, the old Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. They lived in Brooklyn, so on the way back, we were in a cab on the Manhattan Bridge, and you hear a siren, and the cabbie pulls over to let the police truck pass, and lo and behold, the police truck pulls right in front of the cab, stops, and the guys are getting out, and I hear another siren, and right behind the cab, there's another police truck, and my grandfather's looking, and he goes, "Oh my God, it's Al." So he rolls down the window. It's my Uncle Al, who's my godfather, and the front ESU truck. And in the back ESU truck from one truck is my Uncle Bobby. And it's like, what are the odds of being stuck in the middle of the Manhattan Bridge with your uncle in the front, uncle in the back, and your grandparents in the car? I was absolutely amazed. And they were even more amazed because my grandfather's yelling from the back of the cab, where is his voice coming from? And long story short, they go, "What are you doing here?" Long story short, "What are you doing?" "We're going up to get a man threatening to jump." So next day when I got home, I was telling the kids at school and everything else, and there is in the Daily News, there's a picture of them, making this rescue up on the bridge. And from that day on, I said, this is the job I want to do. This is fantastic. This is great. And they would take me into actually one truck when it first opened, when they would go get their paychecks. And but interestingly enough, the guy that worked with Al, my Uncle Al in A truck, was a fellow by the name of George Toth. and they were partners in A Truck for many years. And then when Al retired, George went to One Truck, and they were best friends until they died. I mean, they were inseparable, these guys, and just But at that point, back in 1962, I decided I know what I wanted to be. I remember telling kids when we were growing up in the schoolyard, like, I'm going to be an emergency service cop. That's what I want to do. And my uncles do this. They climb bridges. They do that. They do that. They got Tommy guns. They got machine guns. I mean, we would go through the truck in One Truck back in 1962, 63. They had the Thompson machine guns. It was really cool. I mean, so, and the other thing, growing up in Queens, everybody in my block, everybody on 89th Avenue was a blue collar worker, whether you were police, fire, sanitation, Con Ed, Brooklyn Union Gas, for those who remember Bug, Water Department of Water Supplies, all blue collar workers. And you'd be sitting in the schoolyard. What do you want to be when you grow up? I got to be in civil service. You got to do this because it's great. It's got a career. It's got a pension. So that's kind of what. But focus heavily my whole life on getting. What else? Yeah, I asked my uncles, what do I need to get in? You got to. Starting us to become EMTs, so get your EMT certificate. I did that. I went on, got a paramedic, get training in extrication. I joined the volunteer fire department when I moved to Nassau County. So, all those things that helped me along the way.
Oh, of course. And they even help you on patrol, especially now if you're running into someone that's saying, hey, I'm having an allergic reaction, or hey, I'm having an asthma attack, whatever it is. Even patrol guys and gals now are trained in the medical side of things, which is a big help to the residents of New York City. Before we continue, a shout out again to people in the live chat. Jake Rixner tuning in, DTW Don. We were talking about him off the air. John Scrivani is watching via LinkedIn. He says, Mike is a true professional, a leader, and a great friend. Kenny Bowen, he's always here. He's tuning in tonight. He sends his regards. Thank you to John Costello, Steve Iarato, and Billy Kennedy, who was also a previous guest in the show, as was Kenny Bowen. Billy says, good
Great
man.
guys. Great guys.
Great guys indeed. We have a photo, producer Vic, of Mike's uncle as well as George Toth there in the Culis. There those guys are. I believe that was Floyd Bennett Field, this picture?
That was down Floyd Bennett Field. They would come back to what they call the annual REMA events, Memorial Day in April. Mm-hmm. And these guys were just inseparable. And when George died, I brought my uncle and drove him into the funeral in Staten Island. And it was kind of weird. I mean, George's son was a former emergency guy, and he said, I want you to sit with the family. And I said, I can sit. I was on One Truck. He said, no, but you're with your uncle. And they were best of friends. They were inseparable. And when my Uncle Al died, his son wrote in the eulogy, and he made mention, he says, if there's been a finer man to walk the earth, I have not met him. And that's what he was talking about, his father, Al, my uncle. And God bless him. He was one of the finest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The stories those guys could tell, man.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to have got him on this show.
And he was a World War II vet. I mean, he went to, on December 8th, he went to sign up, and he was on the 16th, and he couldn't get in. So on the 17th birthday, he got sworn into the Navy and ran the landing craft tanks onto the beaches all throughout the Pacific at 17 years old. Something. And he didn't get home until 1946, at which point, when he did get home, he was looking for a job, and they're looking for bridge painters at the George Washington Bridge. And he went up, and he got 200 guys applied for the job. He got there, and he says, what do you got to do? You got to walk the cables, cross the bridge over, come back down, and tie a series of knots. Of the 200 people that applied, only 5 made it. He was one of the guys. And
oh my goodness!
Several years until PD called him, and the first thing they said was like, what'd you do before you became a cop? He says, I was a bridge painter, because you're going to
scare me.
On A Truck, so that's kind of how it went. But
oh my goodness!
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, that generation was different, to say the least, and that's why they call them the greatest generation. Imagine doing all of that at 17 years old. Compare that to a 17-year-old now. I mean, to say it's night and day would be understating it.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So you come onto the job in 1982. Sworn in 82, I should say. And then immediately afterwards, you're going into NSU 17 in Queens. Now, what's interesting, and this is something I was talking about with my previous guest as it pertains to both crime and the fires in the city. As I mentioned, previous guest was a fireman. But as it pertains to crime, yes, the city was rocking in the 80s with crime. Things were out of control, but not everywhere. There were certain parts where the block was quiet. These neighborhoods were relatively peaceful. And that's not to say that Queens was exempt. Certain parts of Queens were rocking and rolling, but other parts not so much. When you got to NSU 17, was it rocking? Was it quiet? Was it a healthy dose of both?
A little healthy dose of both, but I think what would better describe it, when I got out of high school, I took the police test. in 1973, 74, and I got called in 1974 of all times. Hey, listen, I was only 19 at the time, and I just started working in New York City EMS at one of the hospitals, and as an EMT, and I was surprised that I got called so quickly. And I remember going down to the old Slip Street station, which is where applicant investigation was, 1974, going through the interview process. And I said, I'm a little concerned. I said, I'm 19. I says, you got to be 21. How fast are they hiring? He says, nah. He says, you got to freeze. They talk about layoffs. I remember the other guy said, his partner said to me, I never got to lay off anybody. And long story short, they did, obviously, in 75. And now I'm working EMS. And let me tell you, that's when it hit the fan. It just, I would come into work and they'd be holding 100 jobs. We would just nonstop. We'd load up the medic unit, go out, come back 12 hours later, and we just, it was chaos. It was absolutely chaos. They had laid off 5,000 police officers. They were closed a whole bunch of fire stations, laid off a bunch of firemen. They had no money to repair broken down vehicles, so ambulances went out of service. So we were just getting backlogged and backlogged. And that continued 75, 76, 77. We had the blackout, which was even more chaotic. So I didn't start bringing people back into the city until like 79. And then they started hiring PD in 80, 81, and January of 82 is when I went on. So having the 8 years of working in, some of the busiest medic units in the city of New York, it was quite, baptism by fire for a 19-year-old kid. So by the time I went on the job, I had a lot of street experience. So I really felt comfortable when I went. So when we got to the 114, that was Northeast Queens, we had the 114 precinct, we had the 104, the 108, and and the 110. And the 110 was hopping. That was hopping. There was no 115 at the time, but the 110 was pretty busy. Now, the time I worked EMS, I worked in the 110 precinct area, so I knew all the cops, I knew all the streets. It's kind of like being back home again. So it was pretty interesting for sure.
Yeah. As I've said before to anybody that was working New York City EMS, and you're the third guy I've had on for this mini series, the other two being Patty Pogan, who's in the chat, and he says he just finished rearranging his sock drawer, and Andy Burchad is back then. New York City EMS, I feel, was treated like the bastard stepchild, and as it progressed into the 80s, into the early 90s, right before the merge, certain guys came in, Rob Becker, Zach Goldfarb, of course, Steve Kerr, that really rejuvenated it, and that helped the agency take giant steps forward. But back then, talk about doing more with less. I admire what they were doing, but my goodness, I don't envy the position you guys were in, because that must have been tough.
I'll never forget right after the layoffs started in 75, there were no fire companies. The issue, they cut out 9 truck and they moved into Brooklyn. 10 was a satellite. We had a very serious accident on the LIE around Grand Avenue, and really serious, and multiple vehicles, and there were no other ambulances. We had people trapped. We had to get crowbars because there were no fire companies coming. There was no issue available. And we go up, take these guys to the hospital, turn around, go right back up, get more, bring them in, go get the third load, bring them back, because there was nothing else. And that's how crazy it was back in the 70s. It was hard to believe, but when I tell you they were holding 100 jobs at times, they were.
They were. Yeah. That was the Ford to city drop dead era, if you remember that iconic.
Yes, it was.
Highlighting exactly how dire a strait New York City was in. Don Gyrak, or Girak, I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name. I apologize. Girak, he's watching tonight. That's who DTW Don is. And by the way, Don, who was on the NYPD himself from 1981 until his 2001 retirement, you should come on the show, my friend. He says, it was during this EMS period that Mike saved my dad's life. Why didn't you tell that story?
Don was actually my paramedic instructor when I went to paramedic school.
He mentioned that in an email to me.
And Don, great guy, great instructor. And, he worked in Midtown. He worked on St. Clair's. And, you thought you knew it all in Queens until you work in Manhattan. Learned a lot from him. He was a great guy. And it was kind of weird because I had known him. We worked in EMS. We were on a cop shooting together in Northeast Queens. That's another long story. But so getting back to Don's dad, I get a call. I was over with Billy Powell, who wound up going to emergency service as well. And we got a call for a serious, I forget what the call came in as, but when we got there, this guy's sweating profusely, and he's got orthostatic changes where you sit him up and he passes out, trying to get his blood pressure. He's bottoming out, and he's got this tremendous stomach pain. And so I'm checking his abdomen, and he's got this pulsating mass. And I'm like, all right, I got to get him out of here. This guy's got a descending aortic aneurysm. He's got a survivability of less than 1%. Got to get him out. And the cop comes to me. He says, Mike Corr here? I said, yeah, we got to get moving. He goes, guy's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. So he gives me the phone. I said, yeah. He goes, Mike, Don Chirac. I'm like, Don, what's up? You call me? What are you calling me? And he's like, he goes, that's my father. I said, I'm sorry, Don. I said, listen, Don, he's very serious. I think we're getting a descending aortic aneurysm. So he says, I said, I'm taking him over to Booth Memorial, and I'm going to stand by. We're going to see if we can get right to the OR. Hang up, shoot him to the OR, and I was shooting him to the hospital, but we called ahead. And since we worked at that hospital, they knew the paramedics there very well. And if we called up and said, listen, I want an OR standing by, they gave it to us. So we bypassed the ER like super in. We confirm it, boom, right to the OR. Dr. Turner, the surgery, and that 1% that survived, his father survived.
Okay.
The New York Times magazine section. Dr. Mark Henry, who was director of the ER at the time, he said that we really need, this is a story that needs to be told. You know, the story with Don and I being friends and his father, and then the way the whole thing works. So it wound up being in the magazine section of the New York Times front cover. And so, yeah, that was the story there with Don. And but I hadn't seen Don over the years, but great instructor, great cop. And Don, happy to hear from you, my friend.
It's good to see you in the chat, Donnie, and I'll give you a call after the show. You got my email. You need to come on the show, my friend. We'll be talking soon. So between the 107 and the 103, again, the beat's interesting in the 80s. You got transit that's dealing with underground, so they
Mm-hmm.
can help you, but primarily they're underground. Housing's above ground, but they're, again, talk about a department that did more with less. They didn't have that many sector cars in the area. So I'm not going to say you were on your own, but you had to learn how to function as such because that's important for a cop, survival instincts. Are there jobs that stick out from that time period that you're like, man, that was a rush?
Yeah, I think there are a few of them. One of the things when Koch was running for mayor again, somehow the overtime was freed up and there was plenty of overtime available in the subways. So obviously, one particular case, I took it on Supton Boulevard, Hillside Avenue in the subway. And, you know, he's standing down there and a guy comes down and they say, officer, you better get upstairs. They're going to need you up there. And I'm looking, I see, yeah, this guy just wants me to leave so he can jump the turnstile and that's it. And he walks over and he puts a token in, and talking for people that don't know what a token is and turnstile, but they're dating myself. So I had a transit radio, and I said, let me run up the stairs. And as I get to the top of the stairs, people running and screaming, like, hey, help us, officer. And there's a guy in a car driving on the sidewalk back and forth, swinging out Hillside Avenue, around the corner. And I go to try and stop this guy. I get on the radio. The radio don't work above ground. It didn't work on the radio, didn't work up down. So I go to approach this guy. He does a 180 with the car, knocks down a cyclone fence, and puts it in gear and goes to floor it. And he's flooring it right at me, and I'm going to shoot the guy. And that's all there was to it. But a pipe came up, and locked him. So anyway, we pull him out of the car, lock him up. And it turned out that the guy had spaced out some kind of drugs, but he was a very wealthy individual because when we got to arraignment, he had 6 attorneys there. And I was like, whoa, who is this guy? And he was a multimillionaire, but he had spaced out of some kind of drugs so you talk about what transit had to put up, they had to put up with radios that didn't work, and that was the craziest thing. I mean, they were, and I know Patty Porter has told you about the 14th Street subway. Nothing. I mean, your street radios didn't work down there. So, yeah, you were pretty much on your own. So my hat was off to all the transit guys, man. They call them sewer cops at times because you're down there and you're dealing with the dirties of society and you're by yourself. But they turned out to be, but yeah, those times. And in housing, was you had a zone, right? So you may have turned out of an area in Queens, but you'll go down to the 40s project, and they can be there all night down in the 103 precinct, which was a nightmare. When I say nightmare, it was the busiest part of the 103 precinct when I was there. So yeah, transit housing, they certainly had their hands full as well.
Right. The thing about before you go into emergency services, and a lot of guys and gals have told me this, You wanted to learn how to be a cop first, understand the street, and now you had a unique leg up, as obviously as we were talking about with your EMS years, but understand the street, understand what it's like to be an officer first on the street, and then after a period of time that you feel is healthy enough, preferably 5 years, although some go sooner, then you can put in for a specialized unit like emergency. So for you, during those 5 years, I'm sure you had a lot of senior guys that you learned from either directly, things they told you, or indirectly, good things about them that you observed. What do you think were the biggest lessons that you learned that guided you all the way through your career?
You had guys that when I got to the 107, I didn't want to go there. It was like somebody did me a favor. It's a great house. You got to go there. But I didn't want to go there. Young guy, you couldn't go to emergency service unless you came from an A house. So in the years that before you get to emergency service, you wanted to make a name for yourself, but a good name. And then you also wanted to have the experience because emergency service just didn't take any cop. You had to have arrests. You had to, come from a busy house. We were told in those days you had to come from an A house. So I did go to the 107, and 107 did have a lot of old time cops. And I'll give you one particular case where the guy really helped me out. Working with the guy Larry Beninati, and I sent you a photo of the 107 squad that we worked with. And Larry was a senior guy, former Vietnam vet, U.S. Marine Corps, and he had worked in Brooklyn on the A3 for many years. And he had the opportunity to get to the 107 in his final days. He came out there, and we started out at midnight one night, and we got a burglary in progress on an apartment house. As we pull up, we kill the lights, kill the headlights, we cruise down the block. When you look up, we see him on the 6th floor fire escape. There's a guy in the fire escape. Just as we're getting out of the car, he spots us. He heads to the roof. So I said, Larry was an old timer as a young kid. Larry, watch the elevator. I'm going to go up the stairwell and see if I can find this guy. So I go up, and I'm looking around. He said, no, he didn't come down. He didn't take the elevator. So where is he? He was on top of the elevator housing project, right? So pull him down. So get in the car and get the complainant on there. And she says, yeah, I looked out the window. So the guy in the fire escape. So I go to the window where they knocked on the door, and this woman comes in a nightgown. She says, I said, man, was there somebody at your window? Can we check? She goes, no, I was sitting in my couch reading a book, and I would have heard somebody. And now, so this is something's not making sense here. So we bring him back in, and Larry says to me, this guy's not a burglar. This guy's a rapist. And because obviously he saw the woman in the apartment, and he was going to break in. And he said, when we go back, let's pull all the 61s for the area and see what we can find. And that's what we did. We go back and we pulled the 61s, and I'd say half a dozen rapes all around this area. And where did this guy live? He lived in the apartment house behind him. So you get in his window, look out, see where the women were. Wow, there. So it was one of the biggest collars. I got a nice 4-page letter from the DA after that collar. But I would have picked up an attempted burglary. These guys like Larry just had the experience. He said, nah, this guy's a rapist. Look what he's wearing. He's wearing, sweatpants. He's this, that. Look, he's carrying a knife. Okay, we got all that. It's not burglar's tools. There's really now know what it's all about. So yeah, so those kind of guys, you learn a lot. I will tell you, those 8 years in EMS, working with many of those guys from that area were pretty interesting guys, and you just learned. Those cops were guys that survived those years. Think about it, right? So 1962, you go in the police department. Those guys, it was Camelot in those days, right? And then next thing you know, Kennedy shot, and then Martin Luther King shot, and then the riot started, and then the draft. So what they went through from 62 to 82, you were talking to guys walking out the door. I remember this one sergeant I had, he kept saying, I can't wait, I counting down the days every day until it was time to go. Hey, Sarge, where are you going? Where are you going to move to? I don't care. I'm going to get as far away as I can. I got to put my stuff in a U-Haul trailer, pull up with the kids on the last day and leave. Well, the last day comes, he comes by to pick up his check, sitting outside his wife and kids in the car, and he's got a U-Haul trailer. And he said, where are you headed? He said, well, Phoenix is on the map, and I think I can make it to Phoenix. And that's where he went. That's how disgusted he was from the 20 years that he had spent there. And it was an interesting time for those guys. And so having the advantage to work with many of them in the EMS in those 8 years, it certainly was. They gave me a lot of good advice, and a lot of them don't take the job. It's not the same job that they went on to, but it's certainly an interesting side. I was going to say this to the end, but one of the guys that we had in the 112 precinct, he was a great guy. He was very professional, always treated everybody with respect. He would call up the hospital and say, how did that patient make out? Did they survive? very conscious. I just one of the nicest cops you ever want to meet. And we had this case where we got called for an unconscious responsive in an apartment. So we get there, and the guy says, the landlord says, "I haven't heard from him. He hasn't paid his rent. He's always been on time. Can we, I don't want to go in without you." So, okay, we go in, pop the door, find the guy in the bed, SRO, pronounce him, he's dead. You got any information on him for the report? Hold on, let's check his drawer. Open up the top drawer, money stacked to the top, 5, 10s, 20s. Open up the second drawer, stacked neatly to the top, bills. Open the third drawer, open up the night table. This guy had to have $20,000-$30,000 in cash in the apartment. So the landlord's like, "I haven't paid my rent. Give me my rent. We can split this." So this guy really started annoying the officer. And he finally says, "You say one more word, I'm going to have you called. Give me a sergeant down here and vouch it." And he vouched it at all. It was like incredible. So fast forward 15 years later in emergency service, and a guy comes in. I'm not going to mention his name, but I look at his name tag, and this rando, and he's a great guy. And he said, "Hey, do you have any family on the job?" He goes, "Yeah, I had a father on the job, but I never spoke to him." So my parents got divorced when I was a baby, and my mother said, "Stay away from him. He's no good." So I'm sorry to hear that. I said, "I knew your father." He goes, "You knew my father?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "The guy," I said, "was one of the best cops I ever met. The guy always looked out for other people. He always looked out." I told him the story about the money. I said, "The guy's integrity was beyond reproach. He's just a phenomenal guy, great cop. And I'm sorry you didn't get to know your dad, because he was an incredible guy." A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from him. He says, "I reached out to my dad after talking to him." He says, we're going fishing next week. We're going this, that, the other." They
Nice.
became the best of friends, right? So you want to hear an uplifting story. This was it. And he
Yeah.
stayed. Maybe they were the best of friends for the rest of their lives until he died. And then they died. He called me and says, "Mike, I can't thank you enough. If you didn't tell me that story, I never would have." Good guy. Great
Yeah.
guy.
No, yeah, that is definitely an uplifting story. That's one of the more unique ones I've heard. So thank you very much for sharing that. With that said, you get into 1986 and STS back then. Well, before I get into emergency service, just for context, STS now is 9 months. For a period of time, it was 6 months, but now it's 9 months. So almost a full calendar year
Yeah.
before you can get into the unit. So it's a long haul if you want to get into ESU. When you went in, and we can pull up that photo of the Dirty Dozen, I believe we have it from that STS class, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
How long was your STS back then in '86?
That's not the one. That's the
That's
current
a
class.
different one.
Yeah,
That's the current
that's the
one.
current one.
We might not have it, so that's okay. But
Yeah, it's a
that,
plaque that is sent you. Yeah, it was 6 weeks. We went in January, and we got beginning. I don't know. Was it 6 weeks? Yeah, I think beginning of January, and got out at the end of February. And it was certainly instead of winter. I remember that. I said up at the range with a snowstorm trying to qualify, and couldn't see the target. It was really snowing so much, but we did. It was great. I mean, the team was the way it got broken down when we finally got sent out to the trucks. In one truck, it was God. Let me see if I got the actual list here. I do. Yeah. So we had Jin Yee, Hank Gomez, and Larry Olivetti went to one truck.
hmm,
Myself, Pat Pogan, and Jack Cambria went to two truck. Uh, Richie Teasmer and Wayne Saunier went to three truck, and that was it for cops. Sergeant Herbie Schroeder went to seven. Sergeant Richie Green went to eight. And then we had two fellows from transit, EMRU, that were in the class, Bobby Mason and John Coughlin. And so that was the 12 of us in 6 weeks, and wound up going to two. And it was great. It was a great truck and a great bunch of guys. Some crazy guys, but certainly were. It was, Manhattan North is no place like it. It certainly was my favorite truck. But if it wasn't for the travel, in fact, I did go back there at a later date in the '90s. So,
right.
but yeah, so
But being there at the time, and I remember Pete Conlon telling me this when I interviewed him last summer. You got guys there that have been in the unit longer than some of the
mm,
rookie cops have been alive.
mm,
Guys with 25, 30 years in the unit, let alone the job. Guys who were, I think there's one story Pete Conlon mentioned, Pete Dam, who was 62 years old and teaching Pete Conlon how to rappel. So when you're talking about guys like that, I mean, my goodness, it had to have been intimidating, because with the stories these guys could tell and the things they did, you don't even want to look at him. You're so in awe.
Pete Dam was just one of the finest. He had another veteran. My first meeting with Pete was I was in EMS, and we worked. It was on Queens Boulevard for Man Under a Train, and we got there in like 2 minutes after the call came in, and they were waiting for emergency service. And as we got down onto the platform, people would say, "He's still alive. He's under the train." So the conductor's power off. Yeah. So as a medic, I crawled under the train to see if he was still alive, and no, he wasn't. And so okay, we still got to get him out of here. And shortly thereafter, ESU pulled up from 10 truck, and Pete Dan was there. And Pete said, "Oh, you're all right. Because I got to guide you out of here. You don't let civilians under the train." And he put his arm around me. He said, "I need to explain to you, what you got to look out for when you're in the train." He says, I said, my uncles were two emergency guys that kind of, not that they, made much of a difference. But Pete said, "Oh, okay. I'm glad. Listen, I'm glad you know what you're doing. And I just want you to be." That's just the kind of guy he was. And then years later, when he saw me in the emergency service, he gave me a big hug. He's like, "I'm so glad you made it." And, but Pete, you can't say enough about him. And he stayed, I think, until they forced him out in '62. But that was a breed of cops down there. Him, Harry, and Ralph, Shire and Lemon. They were just some of the two best cops in 10 truck. Pete Snyder, 10 truck had great bunch of guys that you learn from. Larry McAllister, Senior. Larry McAllister. Burke. Just those guys who are always willing to help train you, work with you, give you great advice, and you cannot say enough about it. And
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Talking with Mike Corr. This is volume 33 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Now, is there a notable job, and there's a lot of them, and I feel like Two Truck and Lampkin talked about this a couple years ago as well. Two Truck's very unique in that the gamut of things you guys do is very wide-ranging. You have the entirety of Uptown Manhattan, and with that, there's the perp searches, and with that, there's also the animal conditions, and, there's also, of course, the rescue operations that go on for MVAs, a few construction accidents like the one you had in Cops where the construction worker was impaled, for example. You're not too far away from the water, so you get the mix of everything in two. Is there a job early on from that 86, 87 period, your rookie year in ESU, if you will, that sticks out as being a particularly wild one?
Well, there wasn't kind of stretched out over time, and I'll explain why. Well, there are a few of them, but your first week that you're there, there weren't too many things, that were great. EDPs, cancellations, perp search, nothing that really stood out. But having been a paramedic, I needed to keep my paramedic certification, and every 3 years it expires. And so you have to go back and get it refreshed for 30 days. It's almost a month. It's 4 weeks straight at the hospital. So I needed to do that 8 to 4 at a hospital. So I asked them to work midnights for a month so I could do that. So I'd work all night at Two Truck and then go to the hospital and get my, sit through the classes and get that done. It's very exhausting. So I did midnights, I think, after the second week there at Two Truck. And that's when I really saw, we had a jumper at Midtown Manhattan, 8th Avenue at a hotel. I don't know if he was there anymore. It was on the 12th floor. And I laughed because we got there and we're it. We were truck only. So it was myself and one other guy. And that got the guy up on the ledge and said, "Call for 8 truck for the airbag. And we're going to have to do this job by ourselves." So my partner goes and engages in talking with the guy on the ledge. And as we came in through the hallway, the lobby, Sergeant Metis there, and we asked him what he got. He said, "Is there any families anywhere there? Anyway, know this guy?" And it's all right, whatever happens, don't send anybody up. Call the room. If somebody comes in and know the guy, I don't want to set this guy off and have him jump in case the guy that's forced him out on the ledge. So just call the room, give me the room number, and we go on up there. So my partner goes up the ledge, tie him off. I got a rope back at the other room, and we're tying off to some pipes or something, I think a radiator. And he's engaged in conversation with him. And then the phone rings. So I'm figuring, okay, they found a family member or something like this. I pick up the phone. And he goes, "Yeah, who's this?" And he says, "Who's this?" I said, "This is Officer Corr. Yeah, this is Howard Stern." Unbeknownst to us, since they shut down 8th Avenue, it's now on the news that you got to avoid 8th Avenue, police activity, man threatening to jump. Howard Stern happens to be working for WNBC radio at the time. He's a morning DJ. Here's this, tracks down a hotel, calls the hotel and says, I want to speak to the guy in the room. And bingo. So I said, no, Howard, I don't think you want to talk to him. He said, no, no, no. I think I can convince him to come in. I said, you know what? We'll work on it. I'll call you back. I come over to the window, and this guy's been out there for an hour. I come over to the guy, and I whisper in the guy. He goes, who's that? I said, believe it or not, it's Howard Stern. And the guy on the ledge goes, Howard Stern, let me talk to him. Walks right in, he comes in off the ledge. It was like, so, and, it was like, boom, Colin take him from there. But it was kind of a comedy of errors. And I said, we're working in Manhattan, and this is the way it was. But the rest of the week was not so good. I mean, I had a total of 6 homicides in 5 days. They were children, most of them. It was a gang doing executions. And it's called the Preacher Gang, one of the most notorious gangs I've worked in Manhattan. And did 3 in one apartment, and then we got called across town. There were 3 more over there. And this guy, I think they totaled up about 86 homicides that this guy had done over the years. And so over time, we had done hits. One night we were working with Pete Conlon. We get called back to Cords real quick, and we get back, and it's double, triple, and it's 126th Street. It's really hard to park, and we can't even fit down the street. There's so many cars back there. We get in the quarters, and they have attorneys, DA's office, they got narcotics, all up in 2 trucks quarters. And what's going on? Well, this subject we've been looking at, undercover went in to make a buy, and we got him. He said, so we need you guys to do a hit kind of right away. So he said, okay, what's the address? And I said, yeah. So talk to the undercover. What does he got? Well, he's got a machine gun on a tripod. He's got grenades. It's like, so I was like, all right. So we were in the Adam car, which covered that particular area. So Pete and I wound up going over there with a whole bunch of others. And we hit the place. They were gone. They were so well, had so many cameras around the place that these guys had installed. As soon as we pulled up, they went out and disappeared. But as time went on, we wound up doing a major hit with this guy. They finally collared him, and they wanted to get the bodies where he had dumped so many of them. It was on Bradhurst Avenue. And it was an abandoned building. He would take them up to the roof and, say, you got to come up here. We got to discuss business. And if he thought they were ripping them off, he'd shoot them, throw them down into this abandoned building. So the U.S. Attorney's Office said, we got to get the bodies. So, the buildings were condemned. Everything was collapsing on the inside. So they said, well, we got guys that train building collapses, and so let's get it done. So we wound up getting the FBI to fund us with a crane. I mean, a crane at $10,000 a day. And we load guys down on this crane in a bucket in a cage that was able to lose the timbers. Then we did some shoring, and we started recovering body parts out of this building on Bradhurst Avenue. And then they said we're going to get about 3 feet of snow, and it's going to impede the entire operations. And we were afraid it was going to further collapse the building because it was that unstable. So we need to build a roof. The FBI said, what do you need? I said, well, we need lumber to build a roof. So we built this giant roof over this burnt out tenement. And that was, and we had the crane lift it up, lower it under the roof, and we were able to continue to work through the snowstorm. So that was just an example of what emergency does that you're not going to find anywhere else. And it was known as Brett. And so, we got the bodies, and we got the body parts, and we got what we needed for them to go further with the prosecution on this guy. But that was Preacher Gang. They were notorious.
Was that Clarence Heatley?
To be honest with you, I don't remember the name. There's been stories linked to him for decades. We may very well be that guy, but we never got a name. It was the kind of thing was heard about the gang, knew about the gang names, and since we generally would not be making the arrest, just the apprehension, it was whatever narcotics or major cases handling. So.
Right. But interesting nevertheless, and that's one of the things about ESU that a lot of people may not mention. This is something I've talked about before. Evidence searches, you guys put on master classes with that consistently. If you need to get evidence, rather be pulling it out of a sewer, out of a collapsed building, nobody's better. You don't want anybody on that but emergency service. You guys are amazing when it comes to that. Literally finding needles in a haystack.
Yeah, and retrieving them too.
Yeah, of course. And making cases as a result and putting a lot of bad people away. Now, around this time, you were deployed out in 1989 after Hurricane Hugo hit. But before I get to that specific deployment, which we have photos of, and we'll pull them up momentarily, FEMA is something that had started around this time frame, and you're starting to see its effects in New York. You have an FDNY side to it, but it's also notable that the task force in New York is the only one, I believe, I'm not sure if this has changed, but at least at that time it was, to have law enforcement personnel on it, because there's no other place across the country that has a unit in its police departments like an ESU. So as far as your role in that, which is, look at what it's expanded into and look at the great work they've done since. Tell me about the process to getting that NYPD involvement, which has been so key in Task Force One, especially as a newer ESU cop back then.
Yeah, no, it was pretty interesting. As I told you earlier, that I joined a volunteer fire department in Belrose, and reading these different articles. Where I was there in 1985. Well, in 1985 there was an earthquake in Mexico City, and the Miami-Dade Fire Department happened to be there doing some training classes there, and there were a lot of people trapped, and so the Agency for International Development, who was sponsoring them to be down there doing this training, said, what do you need? So they said, well, we could use some rescue equipment and help rescue some of the people that are trapped down here. So a component of the U.S. Agency for International Development is OFDA, Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. So they had the funding, and they sent Miami-Dade whatever they needed. Now you got to remember, Miami-Dade was the only fire department in the country at that time that was working in Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean Basin. And there was a whole bunch of reasons why, the issues they had. The Reagan administration was very concerned those days about getting U.S. aid into the Caribbean Basin. So it never started as a search and rescue team, but evolved. So they got the equipment, so let's develop something. So from 86 to 87, they developed it, and there was an article in the local, I think it was Firehouse Engineer or Fire Engineering. And I read about this Miami-Dade team that had done this, and then the State Department or the Agency for International Development wanted to expand it. They wanted one for Europe and Asia, Europe and Africa, and one for team for Asia and the Pacific Basin, and Miami-Dade was strictly focused on Central and South America. So I wrote to the guy, and basically reached out to him, and the guy was from Agency for International. I told him who we were, NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. We do this kind of rescues and stuff, and he said, "Hey, very much interested. Send us, an outline." I did. I went back to Jack Casey, who was a sergeant in emergency at the time. I said, "Hey, let me tell you about this. They were looking to give $1 million to the next team." And Jack Casey immediately jumped on it. He said, "This is a great idea." We go to Al Baker. Al Baker thinks this is a great idea. And he said, "Okay, let's go to the captain." Oh, we had this old-time Captain Heller, and he's like, "You want to do what?" Leave it there, and I'll look at it. Well, 2 weeks go by, and I got a call from these guys over at State Department, which is Agency for International Development was housed. "Hey, we need an answer. You guys going to come down to Fairfax County for our meeting?" He says, we'll pay your way. He says, "We really like to know about what you guys are doing." So this is 1980, I guess early 88. And I go back to Captain Helen. I said, "Sir, I'm relatively new in the unit, but I just want to know, I got to give these guys an answer." He goes, "Yeah, I got it right here." He says, "Listen, I don't think this is a very good idea. And do me a favor, never come back to me with anything like this again. I'm also going to send you the psych services." I said, "Okay, all right, boom, throw it back in my locker. That's the end of it." I tell Baker and Casey, and they he's old time. That's the way it was. Well, fast forward to December of 88, and you've got the Armenian earthquake, 40,000 people affected. The Armenian bishop reaches out to the Mayor Koch. "I need help from your police and fire, any rescue services you can provide." So Koch reaches out to the police and fire commissioners. "Can you provide anything?" We had no international teams. Well, word gets back to, so Chief Johnson reaches out to emergency service and says, "Hey, can you guys put something together?" He says, "Well, we had this program that kind of got pushed to the side." I got called in. "You got to explain this to the chief of the department." I said, "Okay." I explained this. "I want to know what happened to that captain. Why is this the way we?" I said, "The guy retired." He said, "Now you'll get this team over there." Well, the State Department wasn't having it. They weren't going to bring any more teams over there. You got to remember, this is 1988. This is still part of the Soviet Union, right? Armenia. And we've got 2 teams in here already. Miami and Fairfax County had deployed, and that was it. Nobody else is getting in there. So when we finally explained to Chief Johnson, that's the way it is. He said to me, "You're going to build a team, and you're going to be on the first plane to Miami when they get back, and you're going to So I fly down to Miami in January of '89, and I'm sorry, January of '88, I think it was. I forget the year. But long story short, work with these guys down there for a week, lay it all out, come back. We officially apply to the city of New York, NYPD, for our team to be this program. So in April of that year, they came and evaluated us. They actually evaluated the fire department as well, and they said, we'll probably expand when we do, but they never did. So yeah, so now we're in '89, and we get to September of '89, and Hurricane Hugo hits Puerto Rico, and it's devastating. It's Category 5, and then it's continuing on into the Carolinas. So the governor of Puerto Rico reaches out to the governor of New York and says, "Can you provide us any assistance? We have missing people, trapped, we lost all power." Well, I get the phone call from Chief Abruzzi. Is hey, that team you guys put together, can we deploy? I said, "Yeah, we can do it. What do you need?" I said, "Well, here's my list of things, and all right, let's do it." And so we wound up, boom, 14 vehicles from NYPD, 35 police officers, supply truck and a rack truck, and the fire department sent 3 firemen. And one of those firemen was Chief Downey, and we set up base operations in the island of Culebra. We did, rebuilt desalination plant. We cleared roads. They had no way of getting the power back to the reservoirs because they couldn't get up there. So we cleared the roads. With how many chainsaws? This picture is us rebuilding the desalination plant, working with the Navy, who sent the team in from Gitmo on the USS Custon Hall, and they provided us the mechanical experience that we needed. But we basically dismantled and put it back together. That's Richie Teasmer up there, actually, reconnecting the pipes that were wiped out. So by the time we left, we had partial water restoration. We had cleared the roads. They got power back. So it really was a very successful operation. We even dove a whole bunch of sunken vessels because we were afraid that many of the pleasure craft that were there may have bodies, in them, because there were 400. I think we counted 400 vessels that sunk in the harbor, all pleasure craft, mostly sailboats and things like that. No, there was no, long story short, it was a very successful operation. And we got back, and about 2 weeks later, Loma Prieta, which is the San Francisco earthquake, occurred. We had a team standing by to go there. We sent 2 lieutenants out there to assess. Really, there was not a lot of damage, but nobody was missing, and there was only one guy that was, I think, trapped on the freeway. So shortly thereafter, we get a call from FEMA, and I said, "Hey, we want to know how you did that. How did you guys deploy? How did you build a team?" And so we explained it all to me. So we'd like you to be part of the National Urban Search and Rescue Development Team. And so, our first meeting was in Seattle in 1990. And to my surprise, Captain Downey at the time was the captain, and who had gone down to Puerto Rico, wanted to be very much involved, but he was out. The chiefs above him really weren't interested in the program, so they didn't send him to Seattle, which was shocking to me. And so when they put the committees together, they reserved a seat on the rescue committee for an FDNY guy, but he was not committing to Downey. I said he'd be the best guy for it. So in April and May of, we had our very first meeting. And I think I sent you a picture of the team that was there. We were down at the EMI. Yeah, that's it. So Chief Downey was in the middle. I'm the guy in the black shirt. On a light blue shirt was a guy by the name of Samuelson. He was Long Beach Fire. Brilliant guy. Guy behind him was Billy Gustin, Miami-Dade Fire. I think you might have another picture of him. I ran into him 32 years later, just this last March at the Fire Academy down in Miami. We were doing a class, and I couldn't believe it. We ran into him down there. That's him in the middle, and with the glasses, and that's Billy Gustin from Miami-Dade. And so it certainly was a surprise to see him again. But basically, we spent 2 years back and forth every so many months developing the equipment list, the training standards, everything that you would need to be on the team. It was going to be a 56-man team. You're going to have a technical component. You were going to have a hazmat component. We had a rescue component. You had a medical component. So when you put all these together, the technical team included communications, search team aspect with search dogs, technical search. So it was each position was well defined. And so when we came back, grant money, then even though we were on the committee, we still had to apply as a New York City team. And so when we did that, um, at $220,000 from this federal government to start to become one of the USAR teams. Well, that money had to go through New York State Emergency Management back to New York City. And New York City said, "We're not gonna," it was matching funds. "We're not going to fund it." "What do you mean you're not going to fund it?" Well, so it was like all this work and time and effort, and the city says, "We're not going to fund it." They want to give, they got to pay the whole kit and caboodle. So I talked to Downey, and I talked to a guy named Maniscalco over in EMS, and we said, "Here's what we'll do. We each got purchase orders of stuff we purchased through issue through the fire department through EMS, which was an independent agency at the time. We met in Ray Downey's living room out in Deer Park, and we sat down and we went through the checklist. We were required to have a Hearst tool. Boom, give me the purchase order. Purchase order for a Hearst tool. The airbags, jacking bags, Paratech, everything that we had purchased, we showed a dollar for dollar match. Went back to the state and said, "Here's a dollar for dollar match." We did it. We got the grant of $220,000. That was the initial thing. So that was about 93. And by April of 1995, we were one of the 11 teams at the time that were up and running. And we got deployed to Oklahoma City on April 19th, 1995. So that was our first major deployment as a joint team. And a couple of interesting stories out of there. But yeah, that was it. It worked out well. And that photo, this is the story here. We were there working there for 7 days. And we did a lot of recoveries. And we worked 7 at night to 7 in the morning. And so when we got ordered to be demobilized by FEMA, we're going to bring in additional teams. We knew there was a Marine Corps recruiting station inside the building, but it was on the first floor. So we had to, Mike Curtin, who's in the blue helmet there, said to me, "We got a couple Marines here, and we never leave our fallen behind." He said, "Mike, trust me." He said, "If we can get them out, we'll get them out." So I went to FEMA, and I said, "Hey, you know what?" The FEMA incident commanders at the time said, "Yeah, we'll get to them later on." He said, "We're not going to change our plan," because he had to do an incident action plan, an IAP, every 12 hours. And when they did that, it didn't include rescue Sergeant Guzman. So we went, Chief Downey was part of the IMT, and we went back to him and said, and he was a former Marine, and he said, "They're not budging." So he said, "Can we give it 6 hours instead of the whole shift?" He said, "We Marines are really pretty passionate about this. They want to get this guy out." "Well, he's buried on the land. There's no way you're going to get to him." Steve Spall, who's now chief in the FDNY, he was lieutenant back at the time. He was a civil engineer by trade. One of the most amazing characters you ever want to meet. Great guy, just brilliant guy. And he says, let me do an analysis. And he went in there, we looked at this, and he said, "Yeah, we can do it. We can tunnel in, provide with shore here, and set this up." Okay, we did. Went back down. He said, "Hey, Steve Spall says we can do it. All right, you got it. So you get 6 hours. So we tunneled in and got him out in 4 hours. And it was pretty amazing. So that picture was the last moment just before we got him out. That was Mike Curtin. And as we know, Mike was perished on 9/11.
Yep.
And when the Marine, that was the first 2 Marines that were killed on U.S. soil from a terrorist attack.
Yep.
So the commandant of the Marine Corps heard about that, and he wanted the Marines that were involved in that to have dinner with him at Quantico. And they did. They flew him on down there. But it's now part of the Marine Corps legend. How the Marines rescued the Marines and recovered them. And Mike had a very impressive career in the Marine Corps before that. But
he's a gunny sergeant. He's a gunny sergeant in the Corps for many years. I believe he was in the Gulf War too. And later on, I don't mean to fast forward, but it's worth noting that the same courtesy was extended to Mike when he was found in March of 2002 in the Trade Center rubble. And one of the guys carrying him out was Ray Kelly, also a former Marine. So, and I think there was a story written. I remember reading this when the 20-year anniversary of Mike's recovery hit, because Mike was found around the same time. When Mike was last with John Delera and Danny Richards from the bomb squad, also a FEMA guy, in the lobby of Building 6, as you know, when the second collapse happened. Unfortunately, those guys perished in that collapse. And I believe they found Mike March 6th, but they were saying, the guy that wrote the article, that was one of the guys involved in finding him, that at Truck 2, they had a box with a flag in it, American flag, and the box was labeled, "This is for Mike Curtin only," until they found him. And they found him, and they extended him the same courtesy that he extended to Randy Guzman, who you're talking about, back in 1995. And that, that was really a time in which FEMA was at its magnum opus when you look at the New York Search and Rescue Task Force, because we'll talk about Atlanta, which was another major deployment. We have pictures of that we'll get to in a second. But let's go back a minute to 1993, which we also have a few pictures of, the Trade Center bombing. To this point, and I'll never forget Sam Katz writing this, because I have Anytime, Anywhere sitting right next to me, that he said, and I think he encapsulated perfectly, and mind you, this book came out in 1997, before 9/11, that you guys were never able to look at the Trade Center again the same after something like that. Instead of it being a beautiful landmark, it was a symbol of carnage and destruction, which to this point, well before 9/11, it was the biggest terrorist attack to happen on U.S. soil, certainly the biggest to happen in New York City. I don't know if you were working that day, but you were there in the days and weeks afterwards. So tell me about your involvement in 93.
Yeah, we, as you know, one of the things you had to do as part of the FEMA program was be prepared to fly away on a military aircraft. So you had to be trained as a load planner. So we had to work out a deal with the airlift command out of McGuire, who came up on Monday, the day before that, and with whole equipment on how to do load planning for military aircraft. So those that were assigned on the FEMA team, a handful of us went down there with him when the call came in. So the call came in as a transformer explosion, and that's how it came over the radio. I got multiple injuries, smoke. And I remember by the time we got there, walking down, and Con Ed was there, and walking in, there was a garage, and there's a famous scene with all the smoke coming out of it, and this walking down, and I said to the Con Ed guy, I said, "This is a transformer?" He goes, "No way is this a transformer. We never put the stuff that far into a building. You'll see what it is when you get to the bottom of the ramp." When we got to the bottom of the ramp, and this picture is what it looked like at the bottom, you were 6 floors of collapsed down underneath. And while I was there, they had just finished rescuing a fireman. I think his name was Smith.
Kevin Shea, Rescue
Kevin
One.
Shea, yeah. He had just fallen not far from where this happened. And they had set up a repel system to get him out. So, I ran into Richie Teasman when he's there. So, what are you doing? He said, "Well, we're going to try and get down there." He said, "But not having much luck because the blast blew everything out. And when it did that, it blocked the doors, so you couldn't get in." So he was working with the team. Donald Sedoway was there, and I didn't see him, but he said Donald went down. I said, "All right, look, the way they got the firemen out, they had to set up a holding system. If you want, I'll go talk to the captain and I'll set up a holding system for you guys to go down." So I went out to the truck, get the equipment, and I said, "I'm going to be assigned to the bomb squad for the remainder, so we can get them down there and search for the rubber pile." Unbeknownst to us, Donald Sedoway had found the way in, found the VIN number on the truck, which led to the arrest of the terrorist, which was great, and Donald did a great job. But so we didn't. Once he had found that way in there, we didn't need me anymore with the repelling equipment. So we wound up putting it back, and then as the teams were working their way up the tower, about the 86th floor, they said, "Hey, we got a suspicious device up here. Notify the bomb squad." Well, the elevators weren't working, and if you've ever carried bomb equipment between the X-ray machines and the bomb suits, you're going to climb. It's very, very heavy. So I said, "You know what? The elevators ain't working, but there's a helicopter across the street. I'm going to go over and we got to." And so we flew to the roof, came down on the roof. Very scary time is, we get in the helicopter. Rich is on one side, and the other two guys were there, and I'm on the outer door. And as the helicopter's coming in, all right, we're getting ready. So I take off my headset so I can't hear. And then I open the door and about to jump out, and they swing the helicopter so we get out one side, but I didn't know they were swinging. I go to jump out, and I'm looking down 110 stories. I'm like, no. It's a quick frightening. So the position I actually did get out, but it was a good scare. But
Oh, yeah.
And we walked down, and then we ran into some firemen coming up, and they were like, "How did you get up here? Blah, blah, blah." I said, "You guys got fireman's key in the elevator shift. We got a police key. In the back there is a police elevator." And I guess,
It's funny, because Anna Moan had told me a couple notes on that. Don Sedoway told me the same thing, that, he was about to jump out too to get down there. and then he's staring down the same 110 stories, and he was just looking at it like, ah, you know,
Yeah.
understandably so, because I think it was him and Steve Burbridge,
I
that
know it was Richie Teaser and myself. I think Sadawi was in there.
Yes, he
I
was. He was. I think it might have been Steve Burbridge as well. I'm not sure, but yeah, Don told me that story because he was on for Tales from the Boom Room a couple of years ago to tell me about that specific day. But Anamone had a plan. Well, this is when he was chief of SOD, and I don't think by this point he was the chief of SOD. He was elsewhere. But he had a plan for something like that high-rise rescue. But as
oh
he
yeah,
told
yeah.
me, to that
That's
point,
it.
it was a paper plan. The helicopters had never been used before for something like that. I don't think it's happened since, to my knowledge, but that was the first time. And for it being the first time, and I've heard multiple perspectives, Don's, yours, Timmy Farrell's recently, great job. Great job.
Well, the interesting thing, and I've got photos somewhere. We drilled, and there was a high-rise fire rescue plan, and we used 55 Water Street a lot for the drills, and they would do it once or twice a year, and we did it in conjunction with the fire department. And the concept was you got a high-rise fire, you send a helicopter with a repel team. You can't land because you usually got antennas or other obstructions. We had a kit, and you would repel onto the. In fact, I think I got a photo here somewhere. We'd actually repel onto the rooftop, secure any loose articles with wire ties, and lower any mast, and then the helicopter go out and get a fire team, high-rise fire team, bring them on, land them on the roof, and they will go down and they would fight the fire from there, and we do whatever rescue. So the plan was in place. We had done it multiple times. I'm sure I have them somewhere. I've got pictures of us actually doing that with the fire department. So we had done it for a while. On 9/11, I'm sorry, on the 93 bombing, pretty much, but they never assigned any firefighters to the high rise team. They just never did. So we just continued. There was a pregnant woman, I think.
Yep.
Farrell and his team got off the roof, and a few other people that got off. But the majority of people, there was no fire. There was smoke, but they evacuated down through the stairways. So there was not much of a reason to go to the roof. The people that did were removed, and I think it was very successful. There was some controversy whether it should be continued, and sadly, they decided in port authorities, we're just going to lock the roof doors and not do it. So the reason there was nobody rescued on the roof, Port Authority had locked the doors to the roof from both towers.
Yeah.
And not many people knew that, but in the after action report, it was, yeah, I couldn't understand why, but it was in conjunction with a decision they made with other officials that, hey, we're going to do that. So sadly, I think it was a great program before that. Other cities have done it. I mean, we talked about the Doral fire down in Puerto Rico on New Year's Eve. We talk about the MGM fire in Las Vegas. All very successful helicopter rescues. It's entirely possible that it can be done. It should be practiced. It should be done. It's my opinion, but you've got excellent pilots and the right aircraft to do it in the NYPD.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's something that should be addressed and looked at once again.
Yeah, Air Sea Rescue and ESU do a lot of cross training. So that's where, I mean, that day, I think, and if I miss a name, throw it in there because I don't want to miss anybody. Tim Farrell, I know that because he was on the show. Joe Zogby, Bobby Sharonbeck, Dave Isaacson, who had just come over from Transit Rescue, Mike Curtin. I'm trying to think. I think the pilot was Greg Semendinger.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, he wrote a book above hollow ground, and he was not flying the 412. He was flying one of the Bell long ranges, and he kept flying around. He took a lot of incredible pictures. Actually, produced a book called Above Hollow Ground. That was Greg Semendinger.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible what was done that day, and I think you can use 93 as you talked about if they want to start doing it again. They have done it since in other places. Use 93 as a template. Can you amend certain things in accordance with modern times and modern scenarios and modern technology? Sure, but what was done that day, was second to none in terms of the helicopter rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Just the sheer genius of it to be able to utilize something like that in a scenario that hadn't been seen before to that point. Now, going ahead a year, 1994, this is when the NYPD is starting to open up press-wise. Previously, the NYPD had been very insular. Then Bill Bratton came in, and he brought John Miller with him, and John Miller's whole goal as DCPI, having been a former reporter himself, is, let's open it up to the public, and let's give the public, and by extension the country, a better glimpse at what we do. And part of that was cops that filmed with the NYPD, particularly with emergency service. I wish I could show the 7-minute clip of you, but they would give us a copyright claim, which I don't want. But you were featured not in one of the episodes, but you appeared in the special. One's a water job. Kenny Winkler was on that one with you, as
Yeah.
was Mark DeMarco. And you're asking Mark, are you EDP in this guy? Because he was looking for oil in the water. The other one's a construction accident. You, the late, great Pat Murphy, and Pete Collins. So, you seemed one thing when I watched that clip on YouTube, and I've seen it a bunch over the years. I used to give the reruns on Fox 5 too, is you seem very comfortable. Certain guys stiffen up when someone's riding along with them and filming them. Not you. You seem very in your element, and you caught 2 great jobs.
Yeah, I'm not sure why well, maybe it was because I can't remember the name of it. There was another reality TV show, for lack of a better term. I think it was called Emergency or Emergency Response or Rescue One, and they rode with me in the past. And the same cameraman and sound guy that worked for them was now working for cops, and so I worked with him before. And he we had some great stories. They're really nice guy. They're both from California, and they're really, really nice guys. And they also knew, we said there were times that we're going to send a team up there, and they're going to go through a door, and this guy may be off. We don't want you, so we had to have to stand back. So those are the jobs that really want to film, and you don't want to put them in harm's way. So
Right.
There were those that they understood that. Yeah, I'm sorry, can't let you up on that one. But that was the funny thing is I had never seen the final cuts, right? So a couple of years go by, and it was like I get a phone call, one-on-one. Hey, turn on the TV. You're on TV. And I looked at the cop episodes, and I said, I don't know why there's nothing about the NYPD. The ones that were, Pete Collins was on, a few other guys. But it turns out the story of that 30-minute or 60-minute, whatever it was, started with another department somewhere else. So when you looked at the headings, Lakeland Fire Department or PD or whatever. So I never saw it for a few years. And people call me, turn on the TV, you're on. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm on. And it was reruns of the cop episode. Finally, I called them out there. I said, can you guys send me a copy? And they did. Unfortunately, my nephew took it, and he's never given it back to me. But either way, it was an interesting time. It was great, and the caps, that was a great job that Kenny Winkler did. Water rescue, Pete Collins, one of the great E-men of all time. I just love working with him in California. He was in Oklahoma City with us.
Yep, he mentioned that.
I am sorry he left. I mean, he did leave. We wanted him desperately on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And even the chief detectives at the time really tried to get him on there. I don't know why. I don't know if they froze the list or they weren't taking anybody else, but Pete would have been outstanding. I mean, he had worked with trademark infringement in his final years, and these guys did a lot of stuff, and the money was going overseas, and he had a lot of contacts. He would have been perfect. And, Pete was a great E-man. He really was. And I'm sorry he left, and so were many other people when he went on to other bigger and better things, but he was just a great guy.
Oh yeah, and at the end of that second job, and I'm glad I got to speak to him last summer, and I saw him at Two Truck as well as you. We were all in the same place for September 11th. At the end of that particular job, after you guys get the poor guy in the ambulance, he's wondering, and here he is with a serious leg injury, mind you. Please make sure my car's not towed. It's parked on Columbus Circle. Please make sure it doesn't get towed. Pete tells you that, and you respond, "We'll take care of that." So, man, New Yorkers, right? Here's a guy that just had a life-threatening injury. Thankfully, you guys got him out of there, and it seemed like he was going to be okay. He's more worried about his car.
Yeah, I heard he did well. What was scary in that particular, I don't know if it was brought up. I think it was, but he was assembling a high-rise crane up. When they were in the process of putting an extension on a high-rise crane, an extended boom, several stories up. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they put like rivets in there, and they hold those holes with a spike pole, and it's about yay big, and it weighs a ton. And as they were doing it, putting it together, it slipped out of his hands, fell 20 stories, speared right through this guy's back, in his shoulder, down on his back, through his lung. And it's too heavy to move him, so we actually had to cut the top of it off. We couldn't take it out of him. We didn't know what organs were, so we actually had to cut it. But as we're cutting it, we're getting tapped on the shoulder. That See the crane that they were trying to put together? Well,
Hmm.
there's only one bolt holding that thing on, and that's you got to get out of here. And we didn't want to move him because we were afraid that that weight shifted, it was going to rip the rest of his organs out. So we had to cut it, and then cutting while that crane was above us. So that was a hairy situation.
Oh yeah, yeah. Transit Rescue was with you on that job as well. That you were in the special you were featured in was Best of Season 7, which is on
Oh,
YouTube. That's why it's different police departments. So the best of that particular season, which included the NYPD, that's where you made it onto the special. So that's why it was different ones and not just one department being yours. I'm trying to remember, there was something else in regards to those episodes in which played a central role. Oh, this, which is the uniforms that ESU wears now. At the time, they were still a new concept in '94. So it's an interesting concept because it's essentially a time warp. You got guys that are still wearing what I call the Kansas City Royal Blues, but then there's a couple of you, Billy Lutz and yourself, wearing what's the current modern ESU uniform. So I like that.
yeah, good. And that's a great question because the picture that you showed of the World Trade Center '93 with us all standing there, that was actually the segment I wanted to go into about how the uniforms changed. That's it. See, we had these very thin coats that had no insulation in them whatsoever. And it was February, March. It was freezing down there. It was so freezing temperatures. We had to cut into over 400 cars. We were looking for any evidence whatsoever. We're working with ATF and the FBI down there to search all the cars for any blast damage, determine what type of bombs, explosive they used. And there was also a report that it might have been cyanide also used in there, which was brought up to the trial, almost got a mistrial on it. But there was no cyanide used in it. But Ramsey Youssef went to purchase the cyanide. He would have used it, but for whatever reason, he didn't. Found it in the storehouse. But there was a long story. So we had to do this 6 weeks of working down there. Bit of cold. So I had one of the things we had done when I first got the 2 truck, when we were doing water rescues. You pull up, you take your gun barrel, you lock it in the back, you take your shirt off, and you put your dry suit on. Well, there was no standard uniform undershirt or a t-shirt. So we did that, and no good deed goes unpunished, right? So we make this water rescue. We come out, and the cameras are showing us in all different t-shirts, and so I said, look, $10 each. I got a guy I know. We'll make up the police emergency service on the back. ESU patch. Well, I must have sold 1,000 of those shirts because everybody wanted them. They were great. So we do that. So we're down in the World Trade Center in '93, and we need something to keep us warm underneath. We had they called it powder blue shirts. So I made up the exact same thing in sweatshirts. So we put that on, then you put your coat on so we had some insulation. So we're down there one day, and that happened to be a warm day. Guys taking the jackets off, and all used wearing these sweatshirts to say "Police on the back, NYPD issue." Ray Kelly comes down. And then he comes over to me. See, you guys gonna be out of uniform. I'm gonna get one. Blah blah blah. Kelly comes over and he goes, I like that. That's great. He goes, who made them up? I did. I think that's great. I said, well, look, powder blue shirts are getting ruined. These things aren't insulated. I think we really got to look at changing our uniforms. Sorry, the emergency service should be working on powder blue t-shirts, powder blue shirts. I mean, yeah, give me some ideas, some suggestions. And I wrote the goals. Gold sent me some stuff, and that's why I started wearing the uniform. And that's why I was in that uniform. Nobody else was. So we started field testing the uniforms, and they finally got accepted. And next thing you know, we've got a whole new set of uniforms, which was unique for emergency because we took off all our metal. We took off the ties. We took off the shields. Everything was going to be, nothing could get caught up on anything. And that was the concept behind it. And then we had BDU pants, so we could store gloves in it or whatever you needed to do. So it really was a practical uniform change, and only emergency was doing it. And Brad said, I like the whole idea. Let's go and change the uniforms from powder blue. And then more and more units, like I guess it was task forces started saying, we want the same uniform as emergency. And then now everybody was looking the same. So long story short, that's how the uniforms, that photo there with us in those jackets, it all started in 1993 in the basement of the World Trade Center.
Which I love because, like I said, it's such an interesting time capsule. Not to repeat myself, but to go back to it, like I said, you got some guys in the powder blues. You're wearing it. Not only is Billy Lutz wearing it as well, but I forgot to mention Lieutenant Sobochinsky is also wearing the newer version for that time of the ESU uniform. And it's right, you're right in bringing that up. It doesn't get caught up in anything. You got a couple pens here, so if you got to jot notes on the fly, there's a pocket for that. You still got your gun belt, which you can conveniently wrap around your waist. So that uniform, man, and that was perfect for you guys. It still is.
Oh,
When I see
yeah,
guys wearing it now, I'm like,
yeah.
man, it was a great change, and it really brought morale up too, because Bratton, to your point, went around the department basically surveying the patrol guys, saying, "Hey, would you like this?" And they said, "Yeah." You know what? And it made them feel more at ease and more confident in how they did their job. There's a really good question here from Stu Kelsall. I was watching from England tonight for you. He says, in regards to FEMA, given the previous tense relationship that the Emergency Service Unit had with the FDNY, when did you begin to see the relationships become more cohesive?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of people do not understand the history of it. ESU, when in its earlier days, was actually dispatched by the fire department. It goes back when I first got there, we had to do our reports on a thing called ESD2. And I would ask some of the guys, "What's an ESD1? Why do we got an ESD2?" And he said, "I don't know." So I asked one of the old timers. He said, "That was our fire department alarm codes." "What do you mean your alarm codes?" "We used to be dispatched by the fire department back in the 30s and 40s, 50s. So it's like, well, let's go back in the history. We went back, and the first pilot program was 1925. Before that was a machine gun squad, and they did a couple of emergency squads with the famous truck, the old Mack truck. And by April 1930, the mayor and the police commissioner made it official. So you're going to be doing that. City charter at the time said that the fire department laid out the responsibilities for different city agencies. And the fire department in the city charter said is responsible for fire prevention and fire extinguishment. Police department, law enforcement, and all non-fire emergencies. So what was happening was your fire department was super busy in the 40s, 50s, 60s. They did not, if they had something other than a fire emergency, whether it be traffic accident or, they had horses running down the block that were, running into a pit. You had building collapses, was considered non-fire. So the police department, probably the single biggest program back then was oxygen runs. They would, if there was no ambulance available, they call emergency service, go and deliver oxygen until an ambulance could get there. And that continued all the way up into the 80s. So because of that, by 86, the mayor's office said, "Hey, listen, the fires are down, crime's up. We want to start looking about shifting some responsibilities." And they talked about, well, we can take the rescue work away from the issue. Well, it's not in your purview. The city, the police department certainly didn't want to give it up. And fire department said, "Well, we just want to take the rescue." Well, okay, where's the trade? You have the same training the issue has? And the rank and file truck and engine companies didn't have that same kind of specialized training. Rescue did, but mostly the truck and fire. So that's where a lot of the tensions came. Getting to emergency in 86, I was like, wait a second, finally got here after a lifelong desire to get here, and they talk about disbanding it. And I talked to one of my uncles, and he said, they did a study back in the 70s that said the ESU was the most cost-effective unit in the New York City Police Department. I said, who did that study? Because I don't know. So I mentioned to Jack Casey. Jack says, "Take you out of the truck. You're going to go down and research this and find it." I spent 2 weeks at the public library, pulled every RAND report that was done. And RAND had done hundreds of reports on there. And in there, they basically said, one of the reports, and they were all different ones, because they had a program where they would bring in, say, a cop from Austin, Texas, to ride with the NYPD for a month, and then the same thing, send a cop from New York, and then ride. And all bosses, they weren't cops, but they would write up a report, and they get grant money to do this, and it was all done by the RAND Corporation. So I came across one where I said, "Hey, here's all the reasons why. One, uniform patrol. You get 100% utilization. You're on patrol. Unlike some of the specialty units that stay in quarters until you get a call, that was one of the reasons. They're doing traffic enforcement. We had to write summonses in those days. You are required to respond quickly, and there was a whole list of things. So I prepared that, and that went back to the city council, and they were very, very happy, the NYPD, to see that. So we respected the rescue companies because they had the training and the equipment. most of the truck and engine companies really weren't a bigger problem, but every now and then, as tensions, you would butt heads. And eventually, I think the creation of the USAR team, we were mandated to work together and did deploy together. And then you learn to respect. I see the training that this guy's gotten. I see the training he's gotten. They actually got better than this or better than that. And we wound up building these much better relationships. But I'm not. I'd be lying to you if I told you there were not problems. There were, but many of them. It basically came down to, this is your job under the city. If you want to change the law, you want to change the city charter, go ahead and do it. But we're still doing what we were tasked to do, and what we paid to do. And that's kind of where it was. And I think once they started doing, and the fire department expanded their training as well. And now they're 6 months as well. They used to be 6 weeks. They're 6 months. So the training they're getting is I'm going to say comparable to the issue, but far better than what they had. And again, much of their training had focused on firefighting, probably the best in the world. And nobody was better than that when it came to firefighting, right? So that was great. Some of the rescue companies, they can handle her still just as good as anybody else. Over time, did I see some truck companies that were just the same? Yeah. Well, there are others that were not. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the putting together the USAR team, where you basically had to work and train together, was a tremendous help. Plus, by '89, they rewrote the city charter, came up with the SIMS, Citywide Incident Management System, and basically delegated the responsibilities for each agency. And they basically gave the fire department a better role, but also left the police department in charge of many things that needed to be in charge of. So it's more clearly defined. And so now there's no more arguments because it's clearly written who's in charge of what. And I think that, which is better. It's going to work now. And so.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, 1998, with the formation of, or the expansion rather, the FDNY Special Operations Command, now you have squad companies to where there are engines that are carrying Hearst tools and carrying that kind of equipment, that their training is such that they can function as a rescue company as well, besides being a first due engine, which also makes things a lot better too from the training standpoint, because it fits right in with the guidelines. And as you were telling that story, I was thinking back to my first interview with Paulie Perricone a couple years ago. And I had him on from the Bomb Squad miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, and we were talking about his time in Truck One. And he was a FEMA guy as well, went down to the Dominican Republic in 1998. And that same thing, he was saying, listen, tensions being what they were at the time, you look at these guys on the way to the jobs and you're glaring at them. But when you come back, you're laughing and you're joking around. And you come back from whatever deployment you were just at, and you went from being enemies to being friends. To the next time you see him on a job, hey, I remember you, and you know what that guy's skill set is, and now you're more inclined to work with him. And that bureaucracy and that ego, you check it to the side and you work the job amicably. So it was really a beautiful thing because, and Tony Lisi said this as well when he was on, when you combine the forces of the two, your expertise with their expertise, can't beat it. You can't beat it.
Yeah. And as long as you have the right mixture of guys, and when I talk about guys like Steve Spall, phenomenal. Unfortunately, I mean, the 9/11 lost a lot of their really, really good talent. I mean, Dennis Mojica, Dennis and I, there were so many issues in Puerto Rico with building collapses, hurricanes, that they constantly reached out to New York for assistance, and we would provide whatever assistance. But Giuliani said one day, we can't be doing this on a regular basis. So I need a team to go to Puerto Rico and do an assessment of their emergency services. So it was 2 guys from emergency, 2 guys from fire rescue, 2 guys from OEM. And I teamed up with Dennis Mojica, and just one of the greatest guys ever. I don't know if you knew Dennis. And then when we had to write, it was funny, we had to write a report when we got back, the pros and the cons, what was working, and what needed to be fixed like right away. So we write it all up, and Dennis came down to Floyd Bennett Field, and I had an office down there, and we write it all up, and we spent some time, and we submitted back to Giuliani's office, the mayor's office. And what are you doing? I said, I want it in Spanish. So I said, that's great. You speak Spanish. I speak Spanish, but I don't write Spanish. He said, what are we going to do? So we knew somebody that had a OCR software program that would convert it to Spanish. So we converted it to Spanish. I said, okay, it makes sense to you. It makes sense to you. We submitted. Still, it was Castilian Spanish. So I think Dennis and I laughed about that. And then we wanted to deploy to the Dominican Republic together, and just him, Patty O'Keefe. They were terrible loss for the department.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Terry Hatt was on that task force. Paul Hashagen from Rescue 1 was also on that task force. Mike Milner from Rescue 4 was also on that task force. So a blend of many, many great talents, many, many great men. That brings me into Atlanta in 1996, to where this was supposed to be a conventional deployment at first. And then the chaos happened. Usually you guys go to the chaos after it's happened. This time the chaos came to you in the form of that bombing. So being down there when something like this happened, I don't know what the extent of FEMA's involvement was, but when it occurred, not too far from 1993, and TWA Flight 800 just happened around this time frame too. Tell me about that.
It was July
Yep.
'96. Um, and we had actually had previous. I think we just had deployed to a hurricane prior to that in the Caribbean, and they wanted to pre-stage all FEMA assets in Cobb County Fairgrounds, just outside of Atlanta. And in doing so, we there were going to be, I think, 3 weeks for the Olympics. So there was a team down there, two teams the first week, two teams the second week, two teams the third week. I think we were in the middle week. So we deployed in the middle of the night, flying to Dobbins Air Force Base, truck over to this base, that Cobb County Fairgrounds, which was completely fenced off. And we had a bunch of tents already set up, and we're going to be living in these tents for 7 days. And we said, okay, but we're going to train every day. So first thing we do, unpack our gear, go out to the field, and we start doing training. Unload the equipment, put it on pallets, and we bring in a couple of Black Hawks, and we do flyaways with the Black Hawks. And in doing that, this is all day long, and it's great training. And finally, we get back, and it's going to be lights out. Of course, the campus by 11 o'clock. And they told us before that, they said, listen, 1 or 2 times during this week, we're going to blow the whistle in the middle of the night. We want everybody, we're going to time you to see how quickly you guys can assemble with your gear. So everything will do the same as you would during a real, but there's going to be no helicopters because it's too dangerous to have them brought in the middle of the night, the campgrounds. So we said, okay. Well, we're all exhausted. We're in bed by 10 o'clock. And then next thing you know, whistle starts blowing at 1 o'clock in the morning. And we're like, these son of a bitches. They're going to bring us up. We only got about 2 hours sleep and the all nights. They got to do this. And next thing you know, you hear this blah, 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 blah. And we look, and I said to the guy from FEMA, I said, this ain't a drill, is it? And he goes, no. And so, okay. So the helicopters land, we're getting ready, and then we were told to stand down because, obviously what it was limited in its scope. There were injuries, but there wasn't structural collapse, or everything was being handled, so they didn't need to use our team. But we trained the rest of the week there, and we were assigned with LA County. And LA County did things their way, we did things our way, but that is something that I think also, I think it really advanced both the rescue services nationwide by having protocols. I want to say protocols. There were ways, there were things done way. It's best way to put it. LA had their way of doing things. New York had their way of doing things. I'm saying it's the same thing with firefighting and everything else. So it had to be some kind of joint training that, so we standardized rope rescue training. We standardized certain medical treatments. And we got to see things that we had never seen in New York. And LA was the same thing. So this building together of these USAR teams working together was just a fantastic training experience and education experience, and why this worked and why it didn't work. I remember being on a development committee, working with Bob Samuelson from LA, and he was asking, well, what are you guys carrying? Something simple like the one particular wrench with interchangeable parts. He said, I never saw one of those before. Oh, it works well here because this, that, the other thing. And it was that opportunity to blend together and work together. So
That worked out well. That was one of those many situations where it did work out well. We have the photo of the team in Atlanta in 1996 that we can pull up now, and that's one of them with those Black Hawk helicopters. And I believe there's a secondary one that shows Terry Hatton in it, amongst others. If we have that one, we can also pull it up here temporarily. Stand by while producer Vic works on that one. I don't believe, or do we have that one? Let me check. If not that one, there might be another one here of that FEMA team, Oklahoma City bombing. No, we don't have that one. Yeah, we'll show that one another time. But that was one of the many situations in Atlanta where, again, or one of the many situations overall, including Atlanta, I should say, where you saw the depth of what the FEMA team could do. Just to go back to Oklahoma City for a second, I'm a huge Yankee fan. I remember listening to him call games growing up, and there's a photo that you guys took with Bobby Mercer, who was an Oklahoma
Mm,
native, and that's
yeah.
this one. You're in it. And tell me who else is in this photo here.
All right. So on the far left and standing next to Bobby Mercer is Tommy Rowe. Um, And then you got Bobby Mercer, you got myself, and then you got Manny Hernandez behind me. He's the guy with the real short haircut.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Dario Gonzalez, he was the medical team doctor. And Dennis O'Connell. And Dennis is in the other photo with Mike Curtin tunneling in to get the Marine out of the Oklahoma City collapse. Dennis, another, he's a team leader, just did a phenomenal job. He really, I can't say enough about Dennis. He's just very talented, wonderful E-man. He was the go-to guy when it came to ropes. He's just the best. It really was.
Oh, of course. And Tommy Rowe is also in Cops, and the standard line for him is, "Yeah, we got an overturn, and seconds later, how's my patient doing?" He was brilliant during that MVA with Ray Denninger and Glenn Klein all the way back in 1994. So you go to the JTTF in 1998 after a dozen years, and around this time, you're starting to see things on the terrorist front ramp up. Osama bin Laden does the interview with John Miller in May of 1998. They air it that June. 2 months later, the embassy attack, which was similar to 1993, a lot more damage there, a lot more fatalities. I believe over 200. Another Marine was killed in that particular attack abroad.
During this one.
Yep. And then you get, of course, 2000, which is the USS Cole bombing, numerous sailors killed there. So you're starting to see things ramp up, like I said, on that front. They're still targeting New York because in 1997, there was the attempted bombing of the Atlantic Avenue subway, which Richie Teams was on that job by that time with the bomb squad. Joe Dolan, who's in the chat tonight, was also on that job. And then comes 9/11, which for you was very personal as a New Yorker, firstly, but also a former emergency service cop. You knew just about all 14 of these gentlemen that perished. And then after that comes, okay, this has happened. Now we've got to beef up our abilities to be able to prevent the next attack. And that continued for you well after your retirement. We do have a photo of you from November of 2001 in the queue, along with Patty Pogan and several others in the JTTF from that time frame. And so tell me about that period onward to where, again, don't get into what you can't. But as far as trying to build up good counterterrorism measures and make sure that you guys are prepared, to make sure you guys are adept at sniffing out the threat before it becomes a reality, tell me about that preparation that continued, again, well after you put in your papers in 2002.
Well, it's interesting because it actually steps back even further. I mean, we go back to the 93 bombing, obviously, and we have foreign agents wanting to do terror attacks on U.S. soil. But then again, in 95, we have the sarin gas attack in Tokyo. We've had other incidents. We have the Oklahoma City bombing. So shortly after that, Congress did a study, the Congressional Research Service said, is America prepared to deal with the sarin gas attack? Are they prepared to deal with these ongoing terrorist attacks that we've seen already twice in the U.S.? And their recommendation was that they really have to address that and come up with the training programs. So first one that they actually came out with in 97 was 125 cities where they're going to train first responders to deal with weapons of mass destruction incidents, everything from the awareness level to response operations. That same grant, the same money that came out in Unlogan Domenici also created new programs from the FBI, WMD outreach, WMD coordinators, as well as mandating the FBI do separate squads that would deal with WMD, special events, and critical infrastructure. That was the squad Patty and I wound up going to over at JTTF in 98. What was also put together was need to train the nation's first responders in response to that. So they created the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium in 98, and that wound up being the 5 major schools, now 7, and where I went to work with for the 20 years after that. And that so there's been multiple fronts that it was preparing the nation for that. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, when they expanded to this, our squad was I-41, was going to be responsible for, as I said, all WMD stuff, critical infrastructure, and special events. That was your primary. Secondary, you always serve whatever they need. They need additional agents and detectives work on cases. Well, the embassy bombings occurred in 98, right after we got there. So we needed additional support. I maintained my medic license, paramedic license. And in doing so, I went on the FBI's tactical medical program. So when they deployed to the embassy bombings in Nairobi, Kenya, I went several months later and spent a month over there. And it was I had some interesting stories while being over there. I came back, and then being on the GO team, there were other events and that's what led me to Yemen and the Colón bombing, working in October of 2000, and then stayed there into January of 2001. So, but the interesting thing was John O'Neill, who was I can't say enough good things about John. John was a cop's cop. He was a great guy. He did things his way, and that was not necessarily the FBI's way. But John was an incredible sleuth, and he knew how to talk to people worldwide. With the UN being in New York, you always had the different embassies and delegations, and he wound up just about every law enforcement official from different countries. So when you had a terrorist event occur overseas, he had somebody in his Rolodex. He'd pick up the phone and what do you got going over there? And while SIAC or FBI headquarters was still trying to do an analysis of what's going on, John already had everything firsthand information on what was going on. That tended to be a little bit embarrassing, the FBI headquarters. But I'll never forget, he got deployed over in October on the Colón bombing. And we had a bit of a problem with the U.S. ambassador over there, Barbara Burke.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember driving to Andrews Air Force Base with him and the team. And they cut back the number of people that were going to allow in the country. So they said 2 C-17s over to Ramstein. And she said, I'm only letting one in. And they went in, you're going to limit this, you're not going to do this, you're not bringing a whole team in there. And John fought tooth and nail. Finally, she said, you're done, get out of here, send them home. And I was back in FBI New York headquarters at the time when we got back. And we had a delegation working in the operations. When I say delegation, the detectives from the squad were working that. And long story short, John was putting this all together. And he said, you're going over next. I went over just after Thanksgiving, stayed through December, through Christmas, through New Year's, came back in January. I'll never forget this. I get back in the FBI building, and I was walking out, and he was walking in, and he just got back from D.C., and he goes, Mike, how was Yemen? I said, yeah, you got a minute? Come on upstairs. Get in the elevator, and he's grabbing me, and he put it in, and stopped me on the side, and said, you having fun yet? And I said, yeah, okay. He goes, all right. These bastards are going to hit us here next. And this was in January of 2001. And he says, I can't convince these people down in Washington. They want more evidence. I don't want more, I can give them. And I'll never forget that. It was in January. He's going to hit us here next. And as he was bumping heads with the senior FBI leadership, eventually they forced him out. So last time I saw John was the bomb squad got reported suspicious package at the base of the World Trade Center, in the parking lot, rather, of the World Trade Center, right across by the Greek church. And I had the radio on my desk at the FBI office and the 26th Fed. And I said, Jack, I told Jack Casey to walk over. They got something over at the Trade Center. This is August 31st, 2001. And I got there, talked to the bomb squad. I forget which guys were there from the bomb squad. And said, yeah, we have this suitcase next to a car there. And we opened it up, and it's got 40 sticks of dynamite, inert, they weren't real. And they've got box cutters and razors and stuff like that. Said, what's the purpose? We can't figure it out, but we'll take the case from here. So as I'm walking back, my next cell goes off, and it's John O'Neill. And he goes, Mike, turn around. And he's standing behind the police line. I'm like, what are you doing standing behind the police line? He says, I just started here this week. He says, I'm the director here. I said, that's right, John, I'm sorry, to the left. He goes, what are you and Patty doing? When are you retiring? I said, not for another year or so. He goes, I want you to come work for me. I said, I'd love to, John. I said, that's a very, very kind of you. I said, yeah. So I explained to him what we had and everything else. He says, all right, stay in touch, please. Give me a hug. That's it. That was 12 days before he was killed at the base of the tower, probably 50 feet from that spot where we saw him.
I never knew that. I never knew that about that bomb job, even though it wasn't an actual bomb.
Yeah.
I'd never heard about that until now. It's the first I hear of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, after that, we reopened the case and looked at it. And I wound up, they still had it over at the bomb squad, the 4 sticks of dynamite. One of it said FAA test device on it. And they basically would put this in the luggage so they would check the luggage handlers and make sure that when they x-rayed it, they would pick up on it. So in looking at that, there's a manufacturer in California that made it. So I said, okay, now 9/11 happened. Let's see if there's any connection here. I reached out to the manufacturer. And the guy explained to the guy, so look, this was found near there, and said, I'd like to get a list of your clients so we can track them down and see. And say, I'm figuring, mate, how many can it be? A dozen? He had thousands of them that bought this. So I said, I'd like to get a list of your clients. And he said, well, I'm not about to share that with the federal government. I said, your list of clients are people that should be in protective security. So I don't think the federal government, they're going to mind sharing this information. Well, I still have a right. So he started giving me a real hard time. I said, I tell you what, I just want the list of your clients. You can send it to me, or I go to the U.S. Attorney's Office after the biggest terrorist attack in U.S. history, and they will seize everything in your department and building, and I'll get whatever records I want. So next thing you know, he said, what's your fax number? Boom, I got the list. But they were all security firms. And then he said, okay, let's see if they cross-reference who was in the parking lot that day. So I called Central Parking, who turns out the guy that's in charge of security there was one of the guys who used to teach at the academy. And he said, what are you guys? I'm looking for any receipts that was parked on there. He pulls all the receipts. I'm going through these receipts comparing them to the list of missing people. And just about all of them were missing because that's when they parked their car. They were all killed in 9/11. So yeah, it was kind of weird. But again, it was not our case. It was the bomb squad's case. We just running up loose ends after that.
I'd have to text, who would be a good source of information on that. Him and I talk often, Kevin Barry. I'll text Kevin Barry about that later because that's, like I said, that's the first that I heard about that. And it's so ironic. And we have a picture of John O'Neill. John O'Neill was a maverick in the FBI, and he eventually was, I think, a special agent in charge of the New York field office for a time. He was on the embassy bombing, and he was really as well, in addition to the Cole bombing, and he was really one of the first to warn about the threat of specifically Osama bin Laden.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He became the security director for the World Trade Center upon his retirement from the FBI rather, in August of 2001. And as you said, 12 days later, he was a good friend of John Miller's too. He ended up perishing. And I think there was an agent that said that day, because the New York field office for the FBI is not too far away from there, that he saw John. John was looking for information. He was on the phone talking to somebody, and he walked up to that agent and said, "Hey, what can you tell me?" He's like, "John, you don't work for us anymore. I can't share anything." He's like, "All right." John went back into the South Tower to help people, and him and Lenny Hatton, who responded that day from the FBI, was killed. Both of those gentlemen were killed, and Lenny, I think Lenny wasn't Joint Terrorism Task Force. He was bank robbery, but he was a bomb tech, and the FBI's only casualty that day. So it's just it's as you said, it's ironic. It's in a cruel way. It's definitely ironic. One thing I wanted to ask you about, especially now that you've retired for the second time recently from your counterterrorism work in the year since, is, and again, don't give me anything that you can't, but strictly from an observational standpoint, given your experiences between the NYPD and afterwards in the private sector, when you look at New York's capabilities to stop terrorist attacks on a small scale with lone wolves and a large scale, like what you saw in 93 and 2001, how well do you feel the city's prepared for threats of that nature?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. I like that. So it goes back to when Ray Kelly first took over on the Bloomberg in January of 2002. I had came in work one day, and I got Jack Casey and lieutenant's looking at me and says, "What'd you do?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "The police commissioner's office called asking you by name to be in his office at 1 o'clock. She says, "I don't know what I did." I said, so I get over there, and I don't get to see the police commissioner, but I get to see his staff. "What's up?" "So we understand you have worked part-time for the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, at the Nevada test site." I said, "Yeah, I'm one of the instructors out there." I said, "I don't do it that often, but you have to submit every January 1st. You're off to the employment, and it has to be signed off by the commissioner." Well, once he saw that I had worked for this is in January of 2002, he said, "Get this guy in here, ask him what we need to protect the city." And he said to me, I said, "Well, we've got these different programs." And he goes, "I don't care what it costs. I need to do it." So I reached out to two of the scientists now at the Nevada test site and the remote sensing laboratory in Nellis. And said, "Okay, we'll get two guys to fly in." They flew in. They met with the lieutenant down there from the PC's office. Millions. I'm talking millions. With aircraft, with radiation detection gear. We had two boats built, internal radiation detection sensors. We had backpacks, radiation taking backpacks that were submitted. We had personal radiation devices. It spent millions, and that was just the beginning. So they were very seriously committed. Second thing he did was he started the Joint Terrorism, the Counterterrorism Division, and that was Ray Kelly's brainchild. And he started that, probably got it kicked off in January, February of 2002. And he just finished building the Brooklyn South Narcotics. And next thing you know, they're out and counterterrorism in. But him and Miller, and they started putting people in different places around the world. And really, bad. So, yeah. Colón was the former station chief for the agency. And he came in and said, hey, him, Labouti, they really was very much concentrated on it. I know Patty Pogan and I got detailed back there for 2 weeks in June, and we were surprised. Kelly said, I want the entire department trained in be awareness for WMD, Chem Bio. So he said, okay, when next year when you wanted, he goes, no, you got it done by July 4th. I said, we're talking this first week in June. Are you kidding me or what? And he says, no, you guys are going to have to come over. We're going to do a video, 20-minute video at every roll call the weekend of July 4th. So you guys got to get to work. So we worked with them, came up with a 20-minute video. They produced it over there. So we just gave them all the data that they needed. And then we get transferred back to, we're on loan from, the JTTF, but and so I think they've come a long way. They've got the equipment, they've got they got the training. I don't know what's going on right now. We did for my past 20 years. We were at NYPD, work with John Scrivani. I mean, God, man, that guy's the biggest asset New York City's ever had. The guy is just multi-talented, and he ran NYPD issues hazmat team for a while, and he made sure that we were in and giving all these guys the latest and greatest on equipment training, so on and so forth. And when he retired from there, I brought him right back on. You can work for me part time. He did, but it was certainly a tremendous benefit to us, to the country. And you can do 5 shows on just the knowledge that John's got. I mean, he's just, what he's done from Hurricane Sandy, from body recoveries to you name it. It's just incredible what he's done. And you should just do something on the COVID thing. I mean, he had 10,000, 20,000 bodies, and it was a mess. They brought John in. John cleaned it up in 30 days, settled the whole thing, went back to Virginia where he is. So John's a multi-talented guy, and I can't say enough good things about the guy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I concur with that. And it's to go back to counterterrorism for a second. Ray Kelly, during his final year as commissioner, you're never going to see a commissioner like him again that was there for that long, 12 years, from 2002 until 2014 when Bratton came back. He did an interview with Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes where he didn't go into detail. He couldn't, obviously. But Pelley asked him, do you mean to tell me the NYPD has the means to shoot down a hostile aircraft? And he, in classic Kelly Marine fashion, he's like, we do. And that's all he said. He's like, and we'll leave it there.
they expanded, and they got money left and right. And they knew where to go, and they also wound up sending it. As I told you, their National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, which is 5, now 7 schools. There's the bomb school out in Socorro, New Mexico. There is the Anniston, Alabama, where you do your chem classes. LSU does bio training. And obviously where I've worked for the last 20 years is the Nevada test site. We created a New York office for the Nevada test site. And the last 20 years, I brought in over a dozen ESU guys, instructors from ESU. And we had everything from Maine to Florida, every police and fire academy. And we did the training for detecting dirty bombs, radioactive material, response and recovery from that. So those guys, they were great, but all I can say is I hope they're continuing. And now that I'm retired, I'm taking back, but I'm hoping the NYPD continues that because they were very well prepared. You got to remember, even after 9/11, there are at least half a dozen or more terrorist attempts, terrorist activity. Times Square thing, the subway issue. I mean, there's been quite a few. So it's. I just hope they maintain that what they've been doing all those years.
I think they will. This has been an amazing show, my friend. And now we will go into the rapid fire as we always end. And that is 5 hit and run questions from me and 5 hit-and-run answers from you. You could say pass if you would like to. Are you ready?
I go.
All right. First, funniest call you ever responded to. This can include EMS as well, your EMS years.
Oh, then we can go a lot, but I will tell you. I think the one I told you earlier about the guy in the ledge and Howard Stern calling out, that was one of the funny ones. Another one was with the Pope. We had was in a Pope's motorcade, and getting ready to leave the Holy See residence over on 72nd Street, and they had a big tent stretched out over. So when we pulled the limos in, and the guy comes running out, emergency, got to get in here. So we think, what's the matter? We got to get, resuscitated or get. Come in, and I'm standing right at the Pope. And what happened was they put a spare Secret Service limo in, and that he had to get into, and he could not get into. He didn't want to sit where it was because, as you know from vehicle extrications, you got the A post, the B post, and the C post. The A is the front windshield, the one's in the middle, the C post is the back. Well, he got in this spare car, and he's all the way back, and you can't look out the side because you can't see the people because the seat's so far reclined back. So he says, I want to sit in front of the window. I don't know what I could do. So you got to figure out something. So I go and get a milk crate out of the truck. I go and get a bunch of multi-trauma dressings, get a backboard. We saw it in half. We wedge it in between the seats. We tape with duct tape, pillows. And we finally get this milk crate that the Pope has got to sit on so he can wave to everybody. And so as they pull away, the inspector comes over to me, saved the Pope's ass. So it was kind of it's surreal, to be honest with you. But that thing was kind of funny. So sorry.
Oh yeah. No, listen. You know what? There's another job like that with Howard Stern. To your point earlier, that I think this is sometime in the '90s. I'm not sure if this was the same job, but this time it had to have been something different because he literally stayed on the phone with the guy for about an hour or so. This is like 1994, and then I have to figure out which truck it was, but eventually ESU, it might have been truck 8, got him off the bridge, and he was still on the phone with Howard Stern when they got him off the bridge. So I would love to figure out who specifically was on that job.
Well, the other funny one was how we won the Game 4 of the 1999 World Series.
Yes. Please tell me about this one.
This was great. If you remember, you're a sports fan, there was a fellow by the name of John Rocker with the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah.
John was very famous when he was a good old country boy from down south and had never been on a subway before. And they came over, they were playing the Mets early in the season. Mm-hmm. And he decided to take the train on number 7 train out there, Shea Stadium at the time. And he was kind of freaked out by everything he saw. And he made some comments that were picked up in the Post and then wound up on the front page.
Illustrated. Yep.
Yeah, and so he became public enemy number 1. And fast forward to the end of the year, and I think it was Game 3. Yeah, it was Game 3. The 1999 World Series. They're playing Atlanta and in New York. Well, who's in the bullpen? It's John Rocker. And the bleacher creatures, as you know, are throwing ML, everything onto the guy. So I'm working with an FBI agent, and we had universal access to the stadium, anywhere, dugout, anywhere you had to go. Only 6 of us had that. So we hear on the radio they're having a real problem out at the bullpen. So they sent a bunch of uniformed guys to deal with the bleacher creatures, if you will, then stop sending the ML. So we get into the bullpen. I just wanted to see what was and size it up. And so it's fine. So there's an overhang, and we get back under the overhang. And we're talking to John Rocker, who happens to be a really nice guy. And the rest of the team is now plastered their faces against the plexiglass about 10 yards forward watching the game, because now we're in the 4th inning. And the Braves were leading 5-1. And now the Yankees score another run. The Yankees score another run. The Yankees score another run. So now Rocker and the rest of them are up there with their faces planted on the plexiglass. I'm standing here with this agent, and we're right next to the phone. So now the bases are loaded, and they're calling the bullpen. So loud and so deafening, these guys with their faces planted against the thing can't hear the phone ringing. So we look at my partner, I start laughing. He goes, should I tell him? I said, you tell him, I'll shoot you myself. They can't hear the phone. And it's ringing. And now it's standing in front of the phone. It's like, finally, somebody, why haven't they called the bullpen? He comes on and pulls it. I've been calling you. So another run scored. The Yankees want to win the game. So We talk about how we won the 1999 World Series. You got to remember the Yankees did it in 4 games.
Yeah. Oh, of
Um,
course. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
My producer's he's dying backstage because he's a diehard Atlanta Braves fan. So for context, for those of you that don't know, Tom Glavine was starting that game 3 against Andy Pettitte, and Andy Pettitte just did not have it that night. Yankees were trailing 5-1. So Tino Martinez hits a solo home run. I think Chad Curtis hit two. Well, he did hit 2 home runs in that game. He hit one earlier in the game, then he hit a walk-off home run. In the 8th inning, this might have been when they were trying to call. A man's
yeah,
on.
it
He's
was
facing Chuck Malblock. Chuck Malblock hits an opposite
Knobloch.
field game-tying 2-run home run. Then they take Tom Glavine out. Too little, too late. Game's tied. A couple innings later, off of Mike Remlinger, Chad Curtis hits a home run into the old Monument Park, and the Yankees go up 3-0 in that series. Roger Clemens closes them out the next night in Game 4, and the Yankees get their 3rd title in 4 years. And October
They went
19.
to extra innings, I think. They went to the 10th inning on that.
Yeah, no, in Game 3, and with that whole October of 1999 was not kind of John Rocker because first he had to deal with Met fans in the NLCS at Shea
Yes.
Stadium, and there's a scene in Game 5, the Grand Slam single game, where he's running in. He always ran in from the bullpen, and you could see beer being thrown at him. So after he survived Shea Stadium in the NLCS, then he has to stay in New York with the World Series, of course, being in the Bronx against the Yankees. So that wasn't an easy month for him nor his team. So with that said, that brings us to the second question of the rapid fire. And you mentioned one earlier, but you can pick another one. Most uplifting call besides the one you mentioned earlier you ever responded to.
There's great EMS jobs, saves, and there's I don't know. It's kind of hard. I don't know what we would call uplifting. Yeah, I'll skip that one.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. You had a lot of them, like you said. Third, best advice anyone ever gave you.
I God, I think the great ESU slogan that everybody got when they got there by the old timers was "Know your job, do your job."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, when you take that deeply, it means, yeah, if you get to know your job and every aspect about it, and you're really good at your job, you're going to have a job you love. And if you have a job you love, you're never going to work, right? So, and I did. I never thought I'd leave. I certainly loved the unit immensely, but it came at a time where an opportunity arose that I just couldn't turn down. JTTF, take home car, travel the world, working, and especially it was a new unit within there. Again, I think when the time I retired, I'd been in 12 countries and 25 states, all as a department. I will tell you the interesting one of the weird things that I just got from the FBI. I still haven't gone to court on the USS Cole bombing.
Wow.
Alan Shiri is still in 3 times it was summoned to Gitmo, 3 times it was canceled. We just got another one today. This one is from the commander of the Cole, current commander, invitation for the anniversary, which is this month.
Mm-hmm.
But in 23 years, still not on the trial. Nashiri's been down there since, I think, 2004, 2006. He was the mastermind behind that. Still waiting. I get the updates this week. And we're going to be going now, looks like December. It's going to go to trial. But, 23 years later. So.
My goodness. Yeah, that's incredible to think. Fourth, this is where you could say multiple. You don't got to pick one because I know it's not easy to just pick one. Favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
You can go to pizzerias. I can tell you one in each borough, right? I mean, so Patty Hogan and I were seriously when we were at the JTTF. The agents will always come to you, especially the guys that were out of town. Hey, where's a good place to eat? Well, talk to Hogan. Next thing you know, he's going to give you every restaurant south of Canal Street. But it was we were going to do a book, and it was going to be called The Patrol Guide. Police officer's guide to delis, donut shops, and other fine dining establishments. We even had a publisher that was going to do it, and then 9/11 hit, and then we went into it. But Italian, 46th Street, Becco, for the price. Lydia Bassistani's place, fantastic. I really love Carmine's, although I cannot eat that like I did anymore. I know you had interviewed Danny Cohen, but Danny did us a big favor. When John McGarvey, Patty, and I were going down to Cohen, and normally it's a long wait, but Danny Cohen had the post, and as a cop in Midtown North, they go right in and have a seat down there. But Carmine's great place, and Becco, great Italian food. So I don't know how many are still around. I don't know those 2 are still around. Other places are gone. Patsy's Pizzeria up on 117th Street, up in Spanish Harlem. Still the best in my book.
Oh, there you go. I have to go down there.
Yeah, it's a funny thing when you go with Patty, you walk in and get a slice. No, he gets a pie. Sometimes two pies, but it was
Hey,
great. Great food.
that means it's good. And thank you for mentioning Danny Cohen. It's my guy right there. Like you said, he was on for volume 10 a while ago. That's my man. Good man, Danny Cohen. Still getting it done. I think in Suffolk County ESU, if I'm not
Well,
mistaken.
yeah, he's still there in Suffolk ESU. Interesting thing, my son is in Suffolk County Police Department. And
There
when
you
he
go.
was in the academy, they brought these guys in and they give him a tour and they give him a little speech. They sit him at the table. And so Danny looks at his name tag and says, Corr? Any relation to my Corr? He goes, yeah, he's my father. He goes, you sit at the head of the table, right? He's a two-truck guy. He's going to sit at the head of the table. Well, it turns out Danny was doing the training for the Suffolk Police Department in the WMD areas that we teach. So Danny's partner, when I retired, Danny's partner, Steve Bardak, took my position. Now he's running the CPOS program in New York.
Nice.
So, and Danny was an open invitation for him to come work at any time with us. Great instructor as well.
Take it, Danny. Take it. And that said, fifth and finally, what advice would you give to anyone? I'm going to tweak the question a bit. Instead of coming on the job, anyone that just graduated STS, given your dozen years as an E-man, what advice would you give a new E-cop?
The thing is, it's a great unit. I mean, it really is. But you know what? You have talent and ability. Nobody else is. I don't think there's another police department in the country that goes to the amount of training you have. Harvest that knowledge and harvest it into something positive. In other words, you look at some of the guys that went through there and they got great jobs afterwards. And there's other guys that just said, well, I'll be a security guard. Don't do that. You've got tremendous talent. You got an education. You got experience that nobody else is going to have. So if you're going to stick with it, become the best you can be in emergency service. And then look, there's life after the job. Somebody told me that once, and I was, I'll never leave emergency. I'll stay here until they throw me out. No, there is life after the job, and the talent and experience that you get in issue is second to none, and you're not going to find it anywhere else. So harvest that knowledge, harvest that experience into working for the feds, working for federal contractors. You can make a decent living, and that's what I would do. Don't just look to the end of your career and say life ends. There is life after the job. Many of us have found that out, and it's makes your life a lot easier too, especially when your kids going to college. And I my son was considering going on the job. I said, if I could give you the career I had, I would say go and do it, but I can't guarantee that. So I would certainly look at other departments. And he went to Suffolk, and he's 6 years today. In fact, 7 years today he went on the job, and
Nice.
6.5 years he made detective. All right, so he's
There you go.
He's doing a great job. So.
He's doing a great job indeed. Shout out to him, and shout out to you because this was a great show. I'm glad I found you. I've been trying to find you forever. So finally, one day I went searching through different Mike Corrs in the phone book online. I hit the right one, and here we are. So got the ball rolling. So thank you so much. Before I say goodbye to the audience, stick around. We'll say goodbyes off the air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, though, is there any shout outs to anyone or anything you'd like to give?
Patty McGee, I love that guy. The guy is just one of the best men I've ever known. There were so many of them. Patty Pogan, Charlie Rupert. His name should have been mentioned every 5 minutes because Charlie came to work. I learned so much from Charlie. And Charlie, after he retired, I was begging him to come work for me, and he was busy traveling the world. Came and he's his son's now one truck, Patty. But Charlie, just one of the best men that ever lived. Then you just go down the list. Mark Chamberlain. You got Bobby Savori. Another quick story. You'll love this one. When we were in Kenya, we were doing the investigation over in Nairobi, and I got information that they had assembled the 2 truck bombs, the one that went to Dar es Salaam and the one that went to Nairobi. And it was over in a place called Mombasa, just south of Somalia. So I get a flight out there, and we're searching the area, and we find the safe house where they actually built the stuff. So I wanted to get the bomb tech in there just to look at it, make sure there was no leftover residue or any hidden devices. So it'd take a couple of days to fly a guy in. So a guy from FBI tech, bomb tech from Texas flies in. So gets there a few days later, and we're in a hotel room in Mombasa, and we said, going around the room, this is Agent so-and-so from Boston, this guy's here, and this guy, and he gets to me, he said, this is Mike Corr from NYPD. The guy says, yeah, he's with the JTTF. And the guy says, would you work in NYPD? I said, yes, you. He goes, you ain't going nowhere. You, I got a meeting after this, and we're gonna have a long talk. I said, oh shit, I don't know what happened there. So meeting is adjourned. He comes over to me. He says, "Is there a bar around?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You want to swim?" He got one out on the beach. Let's go down to the beach. I thought, we're gonna duke it out or something. I don't know what's going on here. He get down there, he puts his arm around. He goes to the bartender. This man is not allowed to spend a dime. I said, "You know what the issue did for me and my wife?" I said, "No." He goes, "We got to New York. Our hotel room was canceled. There was a big mix-up. There was a conference going in, and we couldn't get another hotel room. We went to the 13th precinct." He said, we can't help you. Maybe the guys next door in one truck can help you. He rings the bell. John Harvey's working. Come on in. Have a seat. Have some coffee. His wife, this, that, that. Can't find a place. Picks up the phone, calls his wife. Hey, we got 2 guests coming over tonight. Put him up in his house. And and so he's telling me this story. I said, all right, let's get John on the phone. So I got a sat phone. I'm calling one truck to see if he's there. And I get Charlie Delancio. I said, "Hey, yeah, Corr, what are you doing?" I said, "Yeah, I'm long distance call." John around? He says, "No." So when's he coming back in? I don't know. Anyway, long story short, it was kind of weird doing a satellite call with this guy talking about. But I mean, whoever thought in a bar in Mogadishu, outside of Mogadishu, be talking about a guy from emergency service? Just great stories. So, yeah, and great time. So.
That's ESU's imprint. And that's a great story to end it with. This has been great. Like I said, stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. And as always, to my audience, those that tuned in tonight live and those that will tune in later, either you'll watch the replay or you listen to this across the audio players, I always appreciate it. And they appreciate you. They're sending you many, many regards in the chat. So thank you once again, guys. For tuning in tonight and those that will tune in the future. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, a couple of interesting shows. First, on Friday, he was on television across multiple stations in New York City for over 40 years. He's still active currently with 77 WABC doing his own podcast. Ernie Anastas will be here this Friday at 7 p.m., so big get. And spoke to him earlier. Looking forward to it. Originally Connecticut guy. Started out in the Newington, Connecticut Fire Department, then later New Britain Fire Department, and went to the FDNY in 1990, where he stayed for 31 years until his recent retirement at the end of 2021. Tim Klett, retired FDNY lieutenant, for volume 44 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. So 2 very interesting shows, like I said, coming up here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Detective Mike Corr, this has been volume 33 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. And on, as the E-Men like to say, anytime, baby. Take care. See you Friday.